the world can wait. For now, just get comfortable, breathe deeply, and let some sleepy history wash over you. And if you feel like these videos are of any use to you, then you can like and subscribe, but only if you really feel like it. And now, let's begin. In the bustling heart of Victorian England, where the fog seemed thicker than the moral high ground, there was one drug that ruled them all: opium. This wasn't just a street corner transaction. No, opium was the star of the show, and laudanum was its trusty sidekick. Imagine a time when your local apothecary was basically a 19th century Starbucks, except instead of a caramel macchiato, you'd get a dose of Mother Nature's finest. Laudanum, a tincture of opium mixed with alcohol, was as common as the morning cup of tea. The Victorians loved it so much, it's surprising they didn't just dunk their scones in it. Laudanum was the Swiss Army knife of the Victorian medicine cabinet. From calming a colicky infant to soothing the melancholic musings of a tortured poet, laudanum was the go-to cure-all. Got a headache? Take some laudanum. Feeling a bit sad? Laudanum will sort you out. Trouble sleeping? Laudanum tucks you in. It was the miracle cure that hadn't yet been properly vetted. Like a new app, everyone's downloading, blissfully unaware of the data it's quietly siphoning off. The origins of this miracle potion go way back, and it's a tale that winds through the poppy fields of the Middle East, sails across seas, and lands squarely in the hands of traders who saw dollar signs, or pounds sterling, if we're being historically accurate. By the 19th century, Britain was importing as much as 41,000 pounds of raw opium annually, a habit as costly as it was widespread. The price tag on laudanum was low enough to make it accessible to nearly everyone, from the aristocratic lady of the manor to the factory worker scraping by. A small bottle could be purchased for as little as a shilling, making it cheaper than a good meal. Societal acceptance of opium was as pervasive as the smog that clung to the London streets. In a world before aspirin and ibuprofen, it was a practical necessity. Doctors prescribed it for everything short of a broken heart, and even then they might have given it a shot. The Victorians didn't just tolerate their opium, they embraced it with open arms, and why wouldn't they? The drug provided a respite from the grind of industrialization, the clamour of progress, and the burden of Victorian propriety. Of course, the blissful ignorance of its addictive nature was the cherry on top of this bittersweet concoction. The concept of addiction as we understand it today was as foreign to the Victorians as Wi-Fi. They knew opium was habit-forming, sure, but the Victorian penchant for living on the edge, often with a lace handkerchief in one hand and a bottle of laudanum in the other, meant they were more concerned with the immediate relief than the long-term consequences. This was a society that thrived on paradoxes, after all. They were buttoned up on the outside, but living a sublimely reckless reality underneath. Take the case of Thomas de Quincey, an English essayist whose 1821 work, Confessions of an English Opium Eater, might as well have been subtitled How I Learned to Stop Worrying and Love the Poppy. De Quincey's memoirs are both a love letter and a cautionary tale, detailing the ecstasies and devastations of opium consumption. His accounts were so vivid and romanticized that they inspired generations of writers and artists. Yet, beneath the flowery prose and existential musings was a stark reality. The drug was as dangerous as it was alluring. But let's not pin this solely on the dreamy literati. The working class, too, found solace in laudanum, often using it to numb the aches and pains of long hours in factories and mines. For them, it was less about chasing a high and more about escaping a low. The Victorian era was a time of immense social and economic change, and opium was the silent partner in this transformation, a balm for the upheaval that accompanied progress. It's important to note that the romanticized image of the opium den, smoky, exotic lair where the bohemian elite languished in drug-induced euphoria, was largely a myth perpetuated by sensationalist media and xenophobic fears. The reality was often far more mundane, with most opium consumption occurring in the privacy of one's home, far removed from the scandalous portrayal in penny dreadfuls and illustrated tabloids. Yet the perfect storm of widespread availability, societal acceptance, and a general lack of awareness about addiction turned laudanum into the quiet architect of many a Victorian tragedy. Despite its prevalence, the drug's darker side was often swept under the Persian rug. It wasn't until later in the century that the tide began to turn, as medical professionals slowly started to recognize the addictive grip opium had on its users. But for much of the 1800s, laudanum was as ingrained in the culture as corsets and crinolines. It was the era's dirty little secret, whispered about in drawing rooms and consumed in broad daylight. The Victorians were a society in transition, straddling the line between tradition and modernity, and opium was both a symptom and a salve for their growing pains. As we delve into this intoxicating chapter of history, remember, the past, much like laudanum itself, is best taken with a grain of salt and a healthy dose of skepticism. And just as laudanum was settling into its cosy spot as the Victorian era's go-to balm, another curious chemical began making its grand entrance onto the stage. If opium was the Victorian comfort blanket, cocaine was the new-fangled gadget that promised to electrify society. Originally extracted from the leaves of the coca plant, cocaine's journey from the Andes to the drawing rooms of Europe was as thrilling as any penny dreadful. Cocaine first slid into Victorian consciousness under the guise of a medical marvel. It was 1884 when Karl Koller, a Viennese ophthalmologist with a flair for the dramatic, discovered its potential as a local anesthetic. This was the medical equivalent of discovering a unicorn grazing in your backyard. Surgeons were thrilled, and why wouldn't they be? Here was a substance that could numb pain and make procedures more bearable, an early step on the road to modern anesthesia. So, naturally, its use spread faster than a Victorian rumour. But it wasn't just the medical field that took a shine to this sparkling white powder. Cocaine quickly found its way into pharmaceuticals and tonics, becoming the secret ingredient in a slew of patent medicines. Enter Vin Mariani, a concoction of Bordeaux wine infused with coca leaves. Created by the French chemist Angelo Mariani in the 1860s, this tonic wine was marketed as a cure-all for everything from fatigue to melancholy. It even boasted endorsements from the likes of Thomas Edison and Pope Leo XIII, who were clearly in need of a little pick-me-up. Vin Mariani was the energy drink of its day, promising vigour and vitality with every sip. The French were guzzling it down, and it wasn't long before the British caught on. By the late 19th century, Vin Mariani had become the darling of high society. It was the toast of the town, literally, as it found its way into the glasses of the elite, who were more than happy to indulge in a little chemically induced exuberance. Now, let's not gloss over the fact that cocaine had its own set of side effects. While it was initially hailed as a non-addictive alternative to opium, a claim that would soon be debunked, it didn't take long for the downside to rear its ugly head. Users reported feelings of euphoria followed by the inevitable crash, a pattern that was as predictable as the British weather. And as the substance permeated various corners of society, the consequences became apparent. Despite the growing evidence of its darker side, cocaine maintained its allure. After all, this was an era when the promise of progress often outshone the practicalities of safety. The Victorians were captivated by the idea of a wonder drug that could enhance performance, heighten sensations, and banish fatigue. It was the perfect companion for an ambitious age, one that was constantly pushing the boundaries of innovation and exploration. Meanwhile, the economic implications of cocaine's rise were significant. Just as opium had fueled trade across continents, cocaine became part of a burgeoning market. The coca plant, native to South America, was now a valuable export commodity. Countries like Peru and Bolivia found themselves at the center of this new industry, supplying the raw materials that would eventually find their way into European products. It was a classic case of supply meeting demand, with all the ethical complexities that such transactions entail. But let's not pretend that cocaine's popularity was purely scientific or economic. There's an undeniable romance to its story, a hint of glamour that made it irresistible. The image of the dashing gentleman or the fashionable lady partaking in this fashionable indulgence was as intoxicating as the substance itself. And for those on the fringes of Victorian respectability, cocaine offered an escape from the rigid social structures of the time, a momentary liberation from the corsets and conventions that constrained everyday life. Yet, beneath this seductive veneer lay a reality that was less than rosy. The same society that embraced cocaine as a symbol of progress was also grappling with the fallout of its use. Reports of addiction began to surface, and the medical community started to shift its stance. The initial excitement gave way to caution, as the darker aspects of cocaine consumption could no longer be ignored. As with many things Victorian, the story of cocaine is one of contrasts. It's a tale of innovation and excess, of scientific breakthroughs and societal blind spots. The Victorians, with their penchant for paradox, managed to both elevate and vilify this curious compound within the span of a few short decades. And while the allure of cocaine eventually waned, its impact left an indelible mark on the fabric of the era. The journey of cocaine in the Victorian world is a reminder of humanity's eternal fascination with substances that promise to alter our reality. Whether for relief, recreation, or a bit of both, the allure of such compounds remains as powerful today as it was in the bustling, foggy streets of 19th century London. As we move forward in this exploration of Victorian pharmacology, let's keep our eyes open for the complexities that lie beneath the surface, always questioning, always curious. After all, history, much like those intoxicating tonics of yore, is best appreciated with a dash of skepticism and a generous twist of humour. And just as the Victorian love affair with cocaine was in full swing, the era's medicine cabinets were far from monogamous. Into the world of tinctures and tonics, those charmingly deceptive bottles promising to cure everything from insomnia to indigestion, while sneakily delivering a cocktail more potent than a modern-day reality TV reunion. A prime example of this medicinal chicanery is bromide-laced sleep aids, the 19th century equivalent of counting sheep, except these sheep were dipped in a tranquilizing bromine solution. Bromides were all the rage, touted as a revolutionary remedy for restlessness and anxiety, effectively knocking out insomniacs like a heavyweight champion in the first round. By the 1850s, pharmacies were peddling bromide concoctions faster than bakers could sell hot cross buns. But here's the kicker. While they were great at turning your lights out, they came with a side of bromism, a charming condition featuring symptoms like skin rashes, fatigue and, ironically, a perpetual state of drowsiness. Talk about a solution that sounds worse than the problem. These potions were marketed with the flair of a snake oil salesman at an Old West fair, complete with audacious claims and even more audacious ingredients. And if bromides weren't enough for your sleepless nights, chloral hydrate was ready to take things up a notch. Dubbed the original Mickey Finn, this substance was the go-to sedative for those who wanted a one-way ticket to dreamland, often without knowing they'd booked the trip. Chloral hydrate was synthesized in 1832 by Justus von Liebig, but it wasn't until the 1870s that its use exploded, like a trendy new app that everyone was suddenly downloading without reading the terms and conditions naturally. With its ability to induce sleep swiftly, it became a favorite among doctors and, more nefariously, among those looking to incapacitate others without their consent. The phrase slipping a Mickey didn't come from nowhere, folks. But let's not just dwell on the bedroom antics. Victorian tonics were also busy promising to bolster your health with every swig. The era was rife with elixirs claiming to cure all manner of ailments, from digestive woes to the nebulous nervous exhaustion, a catch-all diagnosis for anyone feeling a bit out of sorts. These concoctions were the Red Bull of their day, minus the taurine and wings, but with a hefty dose of alcohol or opiates to keep things interesting. Take, for instance, the iconic Lydia Pinkham's vegetable compound, which was marketed as a miracle tonic for women. This concoction, which debuted in the late 1870s, was said to cure everything from menstrual discomfort to more serious gynecological issues. And with an alcohol content that would make a distiller blush, it's no wonder it was so popular. As Pinkham herself might have said, "Why suffer in silence when you can sip your way to serenity?" The commerce behind these tonics was as robust as the tonics themselves. By the turn of the century, the patent medicine industry was raking in millions, with estimates suggesting that Americans were spending over $75 million annually on these cure-alls. That's a whole lot of snake oil, my friends. This booming industry wasn't just about sales, it was about selling a dream one, where every bottle held the promise of relief and rejuvenation, even if the reality was a little more sobering. Yet, lurking beneath the surface of this tonic-fueled optimism was a rising tide of dependency. The very compounds that promised liberation from pain and fatigue were quietly chaining users to a cycle of reliance. Bromides, opiates, and yes, even those seemingly innocuous vegetable compounds were contributing to a nation gradually waking up to the perils of pharmaceutical dependence. It was like finding out that your favorite comfort food was slowly clogging your arteries. As the 19th century drew to a close, The ethics of these remedies began to spark public debate. Medical professionals and reformers started to question the morality of selling such potent substances without regulation or adequate warning. The laissez-faire attitude that once allowed such freewheeling commerce was coming under scrutiny, as the darker side of these tinctures and tonics became harder to ignore. The public was beginning to ask the hard questions: should there be limits on what could be sold as medicine? Was it ethical to market products with addictive ingredients to unsuspecting consumers? The debate was heating up faster than a Victorian parlour filled with corset-clad guests. And as these questions simmered, society found itself on the brink of a pharmaceutical awakening. The Victorians, with their flair for drama and contradiction, were caught in a cultural tug-of-war between tradition and innovation, between the comfort of the known and the allure of the new. It was a time when the line between medicine and mischief was as hazy as a London fog, and the consequences of this blurring were beginning to show. The story of Victorian tinctures and tonics is a reminder that the quest for the quick fix is nothing new. It's a cautionary tale of human ingenuity and folly, wrapped in a cloak of progress and laced with more than a dash of irony. As we continue to unravel the threads of this intoxicating era, let's keep our wits about us. After all, history might not repeat itself, but it sure does rhyme, often with a side of bromide and a splash of chloral hydrate. As the haze of Victorian pharmacology began to lift, the stage was set for the next act in this curious saga, a time when the laissez-faire approach to drugs would crash headlong into the brick wall of regulation. But let's not get ahead of ourselves. The road to reform was as winding as a Victorian corset, with just as many twists and turns. In the early 19th century, British drug legislation was about as existent as a unicorn in Hyde Park. The prevailing thought was that the market, much like a self-cleaning oven, would regulate itself. Spoiler alert, it didn't. The absence of any meaningful oversight meant that anyone with a mortar, pestle, and a flair for marketing could concoct their own miracle, cure, and sell it to the masses. This was capitalism on caffeine, with more than a hint of opium. The tide began to shift when the darker side of these wonder drugs started to rear its ugly head. By the late 19th century, stories of addiction and dependency were becoming too loud to ignore. The public was waking up, perhaps from a bromide-induced stupor, and starting to question the wisdom of an unregulated pharmacological free-for-all. It was like realizing the punch at the party had been spiked all along. Enter the pioneering voices of reform, the unsung heroes who dared to challenge the status quo. Among them was Dr. Thomas Laycock, a physician with an eye for innovation and a healthy skepticism of snake oil salesmen. His 1865 lectures on the effects of opium and other narcotics highlighted the need for caution and regulation, urging society to take a closer look at what was being peddled under the guise of medicine. Laycock wasn't alone in his quest for reform. The Society for the Suppression of the Opium Trade, founded in 1874, took aim at the British government's involvement in the opium trade with China. This wasn't just about ethics. It was about the moral high ground, or at least a slightly elevated patch of it. The Society's efforts were a wake-up call, a reminder that the empire's economic interests were tangled up in a web of addiction and exploitation. Meanwhile, the medical community was slowly starting to catch on. The British Medical Journal published articles highlighting the dangers of opium and its derivatives, calling for more research and better understanding of the substances that had been casually prescribed like candy. The message was clear. It was time to put down the laudanum and pick up the microscope. Yet, for all the noise, change was slow, glacial even. The first tentative steps toward regulation came not from a sweeping reform, but from the Pharmacy Act of 1868. This was a baby step, requiring that certain poisons, including opium, could only be sold by registered pharmacists. It was like putting a band-aid on a bullet wound, but it was a start. The act was a nod to the growing awareness that perhaps, just perhaps, not everyone should have unfettered access to substances that could knock out a horse. However, it did little to curb the enthusiasm for self-medication that had taken root in Victorian society. The public's love affair with opium was far from over, and the Pharmacy Act was more suggestion than solution. The real turning point came at the end of the century, with the advent of the International Opium Commission in 1909, which marked the first concerted effort to regulate the global drug trade. This was a milestone moment, even if it was more about optics than action. It was a recognition that the problem of addiction was not just a local issue, but a global one, demanding a coordinated response. In Britain, the struggle for drug reform was mirrored by a parallel battle over alcohol. The temperance movement, with its rallying cries and fervent followers, sought to curb the consumption of booze with the same zeal that reformers aimed at opium. It was a curious duality, the simultaneous crackdown on two very different substances, and it highlighted the Victorian penchant for moral crusades. The temperance advocates and drug reformers shared a common goal: to protect society from the perceived evils of indulgence. Yet their methods and motivations were as varied as the tonics they sought to control. The temperance movement was driven by moral panic, by the fear that alcohol was tearing apart the fabric of society one pint at a time. Meanwhile, drug reformers were armed with scientific evidence and a growing body of research that pointed to the real dangers of unregulated narcotics. This clash between medical advancement and moral panic created a perfect storm of social change. It was a time when science was beginning to outpace superstition, when the burgeoning field of pharmacology was challenging long-held beliefs about the nature of addiction and dependency. The Victorian era was a crucible of change, a melting pot where the old world collided with the new, and the fallout was as dramatic as a Dickensian plot twist. As the century drew to a close, the first murmurs of drug control laws began to take shape. The Dangerous Drugs Act of 1920, introduced in the wake of World War I, was a direct descendant of these early reform efforts. Though it came too late for the Victorians, it marked the beginning of a new era in drug regulation, one that would see the demonization of substances once considered benign. This journey from unbridled enthusiasm to cautious regulation is a testament to the complexity of human nature. The Victorians, with their love of progress and penchant for paradox, managed to both elevate and vilify their pharmacological darlings within the span of a few decades. It was a time of great change, of scientific breakthroughs and societal upheavals, and the legacy of this era still echoes in our modern world. As we continue to unravel the threads of this fascinating chapter in history, it's worth remembering that the story of Victorian drug legislation is not just about the past. It's about the ongoing struggle to balance freedom with responsibility, to navigate the fine line between innovation and exploitation. And above all, it's a reminder that while the names and faces may change, the fundamental challenges of managing human desire and dependency remain as relevant today as they were in the foggy streets of 19th century London. So, as we leave this part of the tale open-ended, poised on the brink of further exploration, let's keep questioning, keep digging, and keep our wits as sharp as a Victorian wit. Because if history has taught us anything, it's that the past is never truly behind us. It's just waiting to be rediscovered, one opium-laced story at a time. As we stand on the precipice of Victorian drug law, it's time to reflect on the echoes of that era's pharmacological playground and how it reverberates through the corridors of our own time. The laissez-faire attitude of the Victorians wasn't just a whimsical footnote in history, it was the precursor to the modern tangled web of drug policy and public health. The Victorians, with their love of innovation and disregard for regulation, laid the groundwork for a future grappling with the seductive promise of pharmaceuticals and the grim reality of addiction. In the 19th century, the laissez-faire approach to drugs was less about a philosophical stance and more about the absence of oversight. With opium as common as a cup of Earl Grey and cocaine making its debut as the life of the party, the Victorians were blissfully ignorant, or perhaps willfully indifferent, to the hazards lurking in their medicine cabinets. This unregulated free-for-all allowed substances to circulate through society like gossip at a garden party, shaping not just individual lives, but entire industries. Fast forward to our present day, and the ghosts of Victorian drug habits haunt us still. The opioid crisis, for instance, is a modern tragedy with roots reaching back to those opium-laden days. The same allure that drew Victorians to laudanum is alive in the marketing and consumption of prescription painkillers. The promise of relief, the desire to escape discomfort, and the siren call of a quick fix are as potent now as they were then. It's as if the Victorians handed down a cautionary tale wrapped in a velvet glove, whispering warnings we continue to ignore. The legacy of Victorian drug use isn't just a matter of policy, it's a cultural fascination that endures. We are captivated by their remedies, equal parts curious and cautionary. Take the enduring allure of patent medicines, which promise to cure all ills with ingredients that read like the back of a chemistry textbook. These concoctions, with their outlandish claims and often dubious efficacy, are the predecessors of today's wellness industry. From detox teas to miracle supplements, the echoes of Victorian panaceas resonate in our quest for health and vitality. And let's not forget the romanticized image of the opium den, a trope that still appears in literature and film despite being more fiction than fact for most Victorians. These dens, with their exotic allure, tap into our fascination with the forbidden and the foreign, a reminder that the line between reality and myth is often blurred by the haze of hindsight. Yet, the reality of opium use was often far more mundane, a solitary affair conducted in the quiet confines of home rather than the smoky, dimly lit layers of popular imagination. As we ponder the legacy of Victorian drug use, we must also consider how their attitudes paved the way for future drug policies. The 19th century's blind eye to addiction eventually gave rise to the regulatory frameworks we have today, albeit through a long and winding road of trial and error. The International Opium Convention of 1912, one of the first attempts at international drug control, can trace its origins to the unchecked opium trade that flourished in Victorian times. This was the beginning of a global conversation on drug regulation, a dialogue that continues to evolve as we navigate the complexities of substance use and abuse. In the realm of public health, the Victorian era's legacy is a reminder of the delicate balance between innovation and ethics, the unbridled enthusiasm for new cures, and the subsequent fallout from unregulated consumption highlight the need for oversight and education. It's a lesson we continue to learn today as the pharmaceutical industry grapples with the dual pressures of innovation and responsibility, a balancing act as precarious as a tightrope walker on a windy day. So, what might future generations say about our own pharmaceutical habits? It's a question worth pondering as we navigate our own age of wonder drugs and wellness fads. Will they look back at our reliance on prescription medications with the same mix of curiosity and caution we reserve for the Victorians? Will our wellness trends be seen as the snake oil of the 21st century? Or will they stand the test of time as genuine advancements in health? The allure of a quick fix and the promise of progress are powerful forces, as enticing today as they were in the foggy streets of Victorian London. As we move forward, let's take a page from history, not just as a record of what was, but as a guide for what could be. The story of Victorian drug use, with all its contradictions and complexities, is a testament to the enduring dance between human desire and the pursuit of knowledge. In the end, the legacy of Victorian pharmacology is a mirror reflecting our own struggles and triumphs. It's a reminder that while the specifics may change, the fundamental challenges of managing human health and happiness remain remarkably consistent. Whether we're sipping laudanum-laced tonics or popping the latest miracle pill, the quest for relief and rejuvenation is a journey we've been on for centuries. As we close the chapter on this intoxicating tale, let's carry forward the lessons learned with a blend of skepticism and curiosity. Because if there's one thing history has taught us, it's that the past is never truly past. It's a living, breathing narrative that shapes our present and informs our future. So raise a glass, or perhaps a tincture, to the Victorians and their complex legacy. After all, in the words of that timeless adage, those who cannot remember the past are condemned to repeat it, laudanum and all. In the bustling agora of 5th century BCE Athens, amidst the clamour of merchants hawking everything from olives to wine, there was another kind of vendor stirring the pot, literally and figuratively. Enter the Greek herbalist, the ancient world's answer to your modern-day pharmacist, except with a toga and a bit more flair for the dramatic. While today we might pop a couple of pills for our ailments, these folks were all about embracing nature's pharmacy with a passion bordering on obsession. And why wouldn't they be? After all, who wouldn't want to believe that a handful of chamomile flowers could cure insomnia, or that valerian root was the answer to a restless mind? Let's dive right in, shall we? Back in the day, herbs weren't just a garnish for your lamb stew, they were a serious business. The Greeks, with their philosophical minds and penchant for overthinking, were particularly fond of turning to Mother Nature for solutions. They saw the world as a cosmic pharmacy, with every plant having a purpose. And when it came to catching some Z's, they had their favourites. Valerian, for instance, was the rock star of the herbal world. This plant, with its rather pungent aroma, think of it as the ancient equivalent of forgetting to take out the trash, was believed to have calming properties. It was like the Xanax of the ancient world, without the need for a prescription. Now, let's talk numbers for a moment. The economy of ancient Greece wasn't exactly flush with cash. A drachma, their silver coinage, might have bought you a decent loaf of bread or a couple of amphorae of wine, but herbal remedies were a bit more of a luxury. The average Joe, or should we say the average Aristophanes, might have to shell out anywhere from a fraction of a drachma to several drachmas for a decent batch of sleep-inducing herbs. Let's just say, if you had trouble sleeping, your wallet might feel lighter in the morning, even if your eyelids didn't. Picture a herbalist shop, a modest affair tucked between a pottery stall and a fruit vendor. The air is thick with the fragrance of dried herbs, an aromatic assault on the senses. Here you'd find bundles of chamomile hanging from the rafters, known for its soothing properties. Chamomile was the ancient equivalent of a cup of warm milk before bed, minus the lactose intolerance. These herbalists were the unsung heroes of their time, part botanist, part therapist, and part entrepreneur. They knew which herbs to mix, how much to use, and, most importantly, how to sell it. A good herbalist could talk up the healing power of a plant like no one's business. This valerian root, they might say, once cured the insomnia of a Spartan general. Of course, there was no Yelp to verify these claims, so a little embellishment was all part of the charm. But let's not get too swept away by the romanticism of it all. The reality was, these herbalists were operating in a world where trial and error was often the name of the game. Without modern science or double-blind studies, experimentation was key. Sometimes the cure worked, sometimes it didn't, and sometimes it worked a little too well, if you catch my drift. Ever heard of the phrase, sleeping like the dead? Yeah, that might have originated around this time. So, why does this matter? Why should we care about the herbal habits of folks from over 2 millennia ago? Well, it turns out the Greeks were onto something. They were pioneers in the art of natural remedies, setting the stage for centuries of herbal medicine. Their love affair with herbs wasn't just about patching up physical wounds or soothing a troubled mind. It was a reflection of their broader world view. A world where nature and humanity were deeply intertwined, where every plant had a purpose, and where the line between science and superstition was as blurry as a dream. In this world, the herbalist was more than just a vendor. They were a keeper of wisdom, a bridge between the tangible and the mystical. They operated at the intersection of commerce and care, providing a service that was as much about spiritual healing as it was about physical relief. And let's face it, in a society where gods were as temperamental as the weather, having a little herbal insurance wasn't such a bad idea. So next time you pop a valerian pill or sip on a chamomile tea, take a moment to nod in appreciation to those ancient Greek herbalists. They were the original alchemists of sleep, the unsung heroes of the night, working their magic with a blend of science, art, and just a dash of ancient Greek chutzpah. Now, speaking of nods to ancient wisdom, let's not forget about the heavyweights of Greek herbal lore, Hippocrates and Dioscorides. These guys were the OG influencers, long before social media was even a glint in the eye of the digital age. Imagine them as the ancient equivalent of wellness gurus, except they had scrolls instead of Instagram stories. Hippocrates, the so-called father of medicine, was all about using nature to heal. He was like that one friend who insists essential oils can fix everything from your headaches to your existential dread. He penned the Hippocratic Corpus, a collection of texts that were essentially the Wikipedia of ancient medicine, if Wikipedia was written on papyrus and required a bit more faith in the healing power of fennel seeds. Then there's Dioscorides, the man who literally wrote the book on herbal medicine, De Materia Medica. This was the go-to guide for anyone serious about their herbal game. Think of it as the botanical Bible of the ancient world, with over 600 plants catalogued for their medicinal properties. Dioscorides was meticulous in his descriptions, detailing everything from the appearance and habitat of the plants to their various uses. It was like a comprehensive AZ directory of plants, complete with a list of side effects that would make a modern pharmaceutical company blush. But let's not pretend these texts were without flaws. Dioscorides might have mixed up his plants once or twice, and his dosages were more eyeball it than precisely measured, but hey, it was the 1st century AD. Cut the guy some slack. Now, here's the kicker. While Hippocrates and Dioscorides were busy spreading the gospel of herbal healing, the political climate was as volatile as a cauldron full of boiling mandrake. The dissemination of herbal knowledge was heavily influenced by the whims of rulers and the shifting sands of power. In times of war, for instance, the need for battlefield remedies could lead to a surge in herbal experimentation. Picture it, a makeshift apothecary set up on the fringes of a battleground, with medics scrambling to concoct a balm from whatever local flora they could scrounge up. Necessity is, after all, the mother of invention, or in this case, the mother of a hastily prepared salve that might stop a bleeding wound, if you're lucky. On the flip side, during periods of peace and prosperity, the elite could afford to indulge in more leisurely explorations of herbal medicine. Wealthy patrons would sponsor scholars and herbalists to dive deeper into the mysteries of the plant world, leading to some fascinating discoveries and the occasional misstep. For instance, it wasn't uncommon for a wealthy Athenian to commission a study on whether a certain herb could enhance virility or perhaps aid in digestion after one too many grape leaves. Spoiler alert, not all experiments were successful, and sometimes the results were less cure and more curious side effect. But let's get real about the economics of it all. The distribution of herbal remedies was a tale of haves and have-nots. Access to these botanical wonders often depended on your social standing and, of course, the depth of your pockets. The wealthy could afford to stockpile the finest herbs, while the common folk had to make do with whatever they could forage or barter for. It was a bit like the difference between shopping at a high-end organic market and foraging for dandelions in your backyard. Both have their merits, but one definitely comes with a better selection. While Dioscorides and Hippocrates were hailed as pioneers, their teachings were not immune to the whims of fate. Political unrest could mean the loss of texts, as libraries were ransacked and knowledge was scattered to the winds. In some cases, valuable scrolls ended up far from home, tucked away in the collections of distant lands. It's a testament to the resilience of these ideas that they managed to survive, passed down through generations like a game of telephone where the stakes were life and death. And speaking of survival, let's not forget the role of women in this herbal saga. While men like Hippocrates and Dioscorides hogged the spotlight, it was often the women mothers, midwives and healers who kept the traditions alive. They were the unsung guardians of herbal wisdom, passing down recipes and remedies through the generations. In a world where formal education was a privilege of the few, these women were the keepers of a more practical, hands-on knowledge, born from years of experience and intuition. They were the ones you turned to when you needed a poultice for that nasty cut or a brew to ease a fever. And while their contributions were rarely recorded in the annals of history, they were every bit as vital to the survival of herbal medicine. Of course, not all was rosy in the herbal garden of ancient Greece. There were skeptics, even back then, who questioned the efficacy of these natural remedies. Without the scientific method to back them up, herbalists had to rely on anecdotal evidence and the occasional stroke of luck. Some critics were quick to point out the inconsistencies in herbal practices, noting that what cured one person might do diddly squat for another. This variability was chalked up to differences in humours, a concept that, thankfully, has since been retired from medical practice. Still, it was an early attempt to explain why some remedies worked for certain individuals but not others, hinting at the complexities of human biology long before we had the tools to fully understand it. In the end, the herbalists of ancient Greece were a fascinating blend of scientist and shaman, working at the crossroads of empirical observation and mystical belief. Their legacy is a reminder of humanity's enduring quest to harness the healing power of nature, a journey that's as relevant today as it was over 2,000 years ago. While we may laugh at some of their more outlandish claims, we owe a debt of gratitude to these early pioneers. They laid the groundwork for a field of study that continues to evolve, proving that even in the ancient world, curiosity was the driving force behind discovery. And as we continue to explore the vast potential of the natural world, it's worth remembering that sometimes the answers we seek have been with us all along, hidden in the leaves and roots that surround us. And speaking of roots, it's time we dig a little deeper into the tangled web of myths and legends that cloak the herbal practices of ancient Greece. If you think the Greeks were all about rationality and logic, think again. Sure, they gave us geometry and philosophy, but they also spun tales that would make even the most dedicated tabloid journalist blush. Let's start with the myth of Panacea, the all-healing goddess whose name has since become synonymous with a cure-all remedy. Her myth was the ultimate sales pitch for herbalists who wanted to sell you the idea that nature held the keys to every ailment. Yet, If we peek behind the curtain of this enchanting legend, archaeological evidence paints a less magical picture. For starters, ancient Greek settlements unearthed by archaeologists don't show signs of a whole lot of miraculous healing going on. Instead, they reveal a people who, like us, were often stuck with trial and error, heavy on the error. Herbal practices were a mixed bag, largely dependent on the local flora and the herbalist's skill. A healer might tout the miraculous properties of dittany, a favourite herb supposedly capable of curing wounds as if by magic. But a quick glance at the archaeological record shows that many ancient Greeks bore scars and ailments that no amount of flower power could fix. And then there's the little issue of dosage, which was more art than science. Without precise measurements, the ancient Greeks' approach was often akin to cooking without a recipe. Sometimes you discover a new favourite dish, and sometimes you burn the house down. Now, let's talk about the women, the real heroes who stubbornly refused to fit into the tidy narrative spun by history's victors. Women in ancient Greece often found themselves in the dual roles of healer and scapegoat. They were the ones who brewed the teas, concocted the poultices, and whispered incantations over the sick bed. Yet, when things went south, they were the first to be blamed, a convenient target in a society where the patriarchy ran deeper than the roots of their beloved mandrake. Take the case of Agnotis, a legendary female physician who disguised herself as a man to practice medicine in Athens. Although likely more myth than reality, her tale speaks volumes about the gender politics of the time. Despite her apparent success, Agnotis's revelation as a woman led to her being dragged before a jury of her peers. It was only through the intervention of her grateful female patients that she narrowly avoided a grim fate. The message was clear. Women could heal, but they'd better not outshine their male counterparts, or they'd risk being branded as witches dabbling in the dark arts. And herein lies a stark reality. While women were essential to the practice of herbal medicine, their contributions were often marginalized or outright erased from the official records. They operated on the fringes, their knowledge passed down through whispered secrets and guarded recipes shared among mothers and daughters. This oral tradition was a lifeline in a world where formal education was the preserve of the privileged few, and by few we mean men. While the romantic notion of the wise woman healer persists, the reality was that women were often viewed with suspicion, especially when their remedies failed or when they dared to wield too much influence. In a society where the gods were as capricious as the Aegean winds, it was easier to blame the nearest mortal woman for a failed cure than to question the divine. But let's not dismiss the cultural obsession with natural solutions. Even today, there's something irresistibly appealing about the idea of a cure that's as simple as picking a leaf or boiling a root. The Greeks were no different. They were captivated by the allure of nature, convinced that the earth held the answer to every malady. However, the efficacy of these natural remedies was often hit or miss, more likely to offer a placebo effect than a panacea. The Greeks' faith in nature extended to their belief in the four humours: blood, phlegm, yellow bile, and black bile, a theory that would make your high school biology teacher cringe. The idea was that health depended on the balance of these humours, and herbs were believed to help restore that balance. It was a neat theory, albeit one lacking in empirical evidence. Still, it was a guiding principle for centuries, a testament to humanity's willingness to believe in simple solutions to complex problems. As we wrap up this herbal journey, it's clear that the Greeks' relationship with herbal remedies was a blend of hope, desperation, and a touch of magic. They were pioneers in their own right, laying the groundwork for future generations. But they were also human, prone to the same flights of fancy and leaps of logic that continue to shape our understanding of medicine today. So, as we prepare to close the book on this chapter, remember, the tale of Greek herbal medicine is one of both myth and reality, a reminder that the pursuit of healing is as much an art as it is a science. The Greeks may have been the original dreamers, but their legacy lives on in every herbal tea and natural remedy we reach for today, proving that sometimes the most enduring stories are those that blend a little fact with a lot of fiction. Stay tuned as the saga of ancient Greek medicine continues to unfold, offering new insights and revelations just waiting to be discovered. As we delve deeper into the verdant world of ancient Greek herbal remedies, let's peel back the layers of this aromatic onion to reveal the broader economic and social tapestry interwoven with these natural cures. To start, consider the trade routes. the ancient highways of commerce that ferried everything from spices to silks. Picture this. Herbs weren't simply plucked from a neighbour's garden. They were the cargo of a vast network sprawling across the Mediterranean, each leaf carrying the scent of distant shores. Now, let's talk logistics. By the 5th century BCE, Greek merchants were the Elon Musks of the maritime world, their triremes slicing through waves with the efficiency of a modern-day bullet train. These ships crisscrossed the Aegean and beyond, forming a web of trade routes that spanned from the olive groves of Crete to the bustling markets of Egypt, and even as far as the mysterious lands of India. This wasn't just a casual Sunday sail. It was a full-on logistical ballet that required meticulous planning and a deep understanding of the winds and seas. The Greeks were particularly fond of saffron from the east, which was pricier than a first-class ticket to the underworld, and cinnamon from the Arabian Peninsula, which could cost you a small herd of goats if you weren't careful. These trade routes weren't just about moving products. They were the veins through which culture, ideas, and economic power flowed. The Greeks had a symbiotic relationship with these routes, importing not only herbs but also knowledge about their uses. They picked up tips and tricks from the Egyptians, who were the OGs of plant-based medicine, having mastered the art of healing with herbs centuries earlier. The Egyptians were like the hipsters of the natural remedy world, using aloe vera before it was cool. But this cultural exchange was a two-way street. As the Greeks imported exotic herbs, they exported their own herbal knowledge. Their texts, particularly the works of Dioscorides, became the herbalist's Bible, travelling as far as the farthest reach of the Roman Empire. The Romans, never ones to reinvent the wheel, adopted Greek herbal practices with gusto, which meant Dioscorides' scribblings were soon as commonplace in Roman apothecaries as gladiators were in the Colosseum. Now, let's zoom in on the social dynamics. Who got their hands on these herbal treasures and who was left to chew on the leftovers? As you might have guessed, social hierarchy was as rigid as the columns of the Parthenon. The rich and powerful, the elites who dined on peacock tongues and sipped wine sweeter than a bard's serenade, had first dibs on the most potent and exotic herbs. These were the original wellness influencers, their wealth allowing them to stockpile the finest plants, much like a modern-day wellness guru hoarding superfoods. For the average citizen, herbal remedies were more of a DIY affair. Commoners relied on local flora, foraging for what they could find or bartering with the village herbalist for a sprig of thyme or a pinch of sage. They were the real pioneers of the organic movement, long before anyone thought to slap a natural label on a product and charge twice as much. If you were lucky, your local herbalist might have connections, a trade network of sorts, to bring in something more exotic. But it was still a roll of the dice whether that imported herb would actually do what it promised. And let's not forget the gender dynamics at play. While men like Dioscorides and Hippocrates hogged the spotlight, women were often relegated to the background. Yet it was these women, midwives, healers, and village-wise women, who were the real custodians of herbal knowledge, passing it down like a cherished family heirloom. They were the unsung heroines, operating beneath the radar of official history, quietly ensuring that herbal traditions endured. So how did these ancient practices shape modern Western medicine? Well, it's a story of both continuity and transformation. Many of the herbs catalogued by Dioscorides are mainstays in today's alternative medicine cabinets. Take willow bark, used by the Greeks for pain relief, which is the natural forerunner of aspirin. Or consider the humble mint, which Dioscorides recommended for stomach ailments, a remedy your grandmother probably swore by. But let's get real about the current fascination with natural cures. It's a double-edged sword, this obsession with all things organic and plant-based. On one hand, it's a nod to our ancestors, a recognition that they were onto something with their herbal concoctions. On the other hand, it's also a romanticized view that can lead to the kind of blind faith that had the Greeks believing in the four humours. The allure of a quick fix from nature is enticing, but it's not always rooted in the scientific rigour that modern medicine demands. Yet, there's a reason this fascination persists. It's an echo of the ancient belief in a cosmic balance, a world where humans and nature are intertwined. In an era where technology can sometimes feel alienating, the idea of healing with herbs offers a sense of connection to the earth and to our history. It's a comforting notion, even if it's occasionally more rooted in nostalgia than reality. The legacy of Greek herbal medicine is a complex tapestry of fact and folklore, a testament to humanity's enduring quest for healing and understanding. It's a reminder that while we've made leaps and bounds in medical science, there's still an intrinsic human desire to return to nature, to seek solace in the simple remedies of our forebears. As we continue to unravel the stories of ancient Greece, let's keep in mind the lessons they offer, not just about herbs and healing, but about the very human need to find meaning in the natural world around us. And on that note, stay tuned as we journey deeper into the fascinating interplay of myth and medicine. There are still more layers to uncover, more stories to tell, and more wisdom to glean from the ancients who dared to dream that the answers to their ills lay just beneath their feet. So, as we continue our odyssey through the verdant paths of ancient Greek herbal remedies, let's take a moment to consider their legacy, both the mythology and the reality. It's a bit like looking at a glossy brochure for a Grecian getaway, only to arrive and find out the hotel pool is more puddle than paradise. The Greeks left us with a treasure trove of herbal wisdom wrapped in a tapestry of legend, but the real story is both grander and grittier than the myths would have us believe. Let's start with the mythical side of things. The Greeks were the original storytellers, the Spielberg of the ancient world, spinning tales that wove the natural and supernatural into one intricate tapestry. Take the myth of Asclepius, the god of medicine, who was said to have wielded herbs with the kind of finesse that would make modern-day pharmacists weep with envy. According to legend, Asclepius could bring the dead back to life with a simple plant, which might explain why he was such a hit with the living. But let's be real, even in a world as wild as ancient Greece, the power to resurrect wasn't exactly standard issue in the herbal toolkit. Now, on the reality front, the Greeks were pioneers, sure, but not without their missteps. They were experimenting with herbal medicine in a time when the scientific method was just a glint in Aristotle's eye. Their approach was more, throw it against the wall and see what sticks, than double-blind, placebo-controlled trial. But let's give credit where credit's due. They were doing their best with the tools they had, a testament to human ingenuity and our endless quest to fix what ails us. Fast forward a couple of millennia, and you might think we'd have moved on from those rudimentary beginnings. But no, the allure of natural remedies is as potent today as it was in ancient Greece. The irony? Many of these ancient solutions are now being marketed as the cutting edge of wellness. It's like selling someone a pair of jeans with holes already in them. What was once necessity is now fashion. Consider the case of valerian root, the ancient Greeks' go-to for insomnia. Today, it's back in vogue, hailed as a natural sleep aid without the pesky side effects of modern pharmaceuticals. And yet, the science is still catching up to the hype. Studies show mixed results, with some people swearing by its calming effects, while others experience no more than a placebo effect. It's a reminder that while the Greeks might have been onto something, not every herbal remedy is a miracle in disguise. Or take chamomile, the Greeks' equivalent of a bedtime lullaby. This humble flower has re-emerged as a wellness staple, found in teas, creams, and even aromatherapy oils. The ancient Greeks would probably chuckle at how something they once used as a simple sleep aid has become a multi-billion-dollar industry. The irony here is as rich as the Corinthians' purse, and it highlights a crucial point. The more things change, the more they stay the same. Speaking of staying the same, let's reflect on the cyclical nature of medical trends. It's a bit like fashion. What was old is new again, and what was once cutting edge is now considered quaint. The Greeks believed in balancing the four humours to maintain health, a concept as outdated as a rotary phone. Yet, the idea that our bodies operate on a delicate balance isn't so far removed from modern holistic practices that emphasize equilibrium and harmony. And here's a quotable insight for you. The human quest for the perfect night's sleep is as eternal as the stars in the Aegean sky. Whether it's through valerian, chamomile, or the latest pharmaceutical breakthrough, the pursuit of rest is a constant, a reminder that no matter how far we've come, some needs are as timeless as the tales of Hercules. In wrapping up this exploration of Greek herbal remedies, we're left to ponder their lasting legacy. They've given us more than just a list of plants and their uses. They've provided a framework for understanding the world around us and our place within it. The Greeks taught us that nature holds secrets waiting to be unlocked, and they sparked a curiosity that continues to drive scientific discovery today. So, Next time you brew a cup of chamomile tea or reach for a valerian supplement, take a moment to nod in appreciation to those ancient herbalists. They were the original dreamers, blending science and superstition in a quest to heal and understand. Their legacy is a reminder that the path to knowledge is often winding and full of unexpected turns, but it's a journey worth taking. As we close this chapter, let's hold on to the sharp observations and insights we've uncovered. The Greeks might not have had all the answers, but they were asking the right questions. And in a world where the line between myth and reality often blurs, that's a legacy as enduring as the tales etched in the stones of the Parthenon. Confucius, that famous sage of China, didn't exactly roll out of bed one day, fully enlightened and ready to drop pearls of wisdom. Nope, he was born in 5W1 BCE in the state of Lu, a slice of the Zhou dynasty pie. The dynasty itself was in chaos, like a soap opera constantly in rerun mode. Think Game of Thrones, but with more philosophy and less dragons. Confucius's early life was far from glamorous. He wasn't born into a dynasty of his own. Rather, he was from a family that was noble in name, but not in pocket. His father, Kong Ha, was a retired military officer, but it wasn't all glory days and war medals. By the time Confucius came along, the family's fortune had dwindled faster than a politician's approval rating post-scandal. Confucius's upbringing was about as humble as it gets. Picture a young boy, more likely to be found patching the roof than practicing calligraphy. The legend likes to paint him as a child prodigy, but reality suggests he was more of a scrappy kid with a thirst for learning. He grew up at a time when the Zhou dynasty was falling apart at the seams, with warlords bickering over land like it was Black Friday at the local market. Confucius didn't have the luxury of a structured education, so he cobbled together his learning from wherever he could find it. This was the kind of kid who would have made the rounds to every TED Talk if they'd existed back then. Despite the chaos around him, Confucius was determined to make something of himself. He was a bit of an overachiever, even if his resume was more of a wish list at first. He started working various odd jobs to support his mother after his father passed away. Confucius might have been a teacher at heart, but his early career was like a bad episode of career path roulette. He found himself in roles ranging from a keeper of granaries to, legend has it, a cowherd. It's said that he was so dedicated that he could recite the names of all the cows in his herd, a skill that, while impressive, didn't exactly scream future philosopher. As Confucius cut his teeth on the job market, he quickly realized the system was about as stable as a house of cards in a windstorm. The Zhou dynasty was all about hereditary positions, where talent and merit took a back seat to who your grandfather happened to be. Confucius, lacking the right lineage and connections, faced a series of professional rejections that would make modern job hunters feel a bit better about their own LinkedIn rejections. The bureaucracy was a labyrinth, and Confucius seemed to be perpetually lost in it. But our man Confucius was nothing if not persistent. He believed in the power of education and self-improvement, even if it meant starting at the bottom. His passion for learning and teaching eventually led him to become a tutor, guiding students through the chaotic maze of life with his burgeoning philosophy. He wasn't exactly raking in the cash, but he was gaining something far more valuable, a reputation. Confucius began to attract followers who were eager to learn from a man who seemed to have more questions than answers, but in a good way. Despite the odds, Confucius held on to his dream of public service like a dog with a bone. He wanted to fix the fractured society around him, convinced that if he could just get his foot in the door, he could make a difference. It was a noble ambition, even if it often felt like he was banging his head against the proverbial wall. The state of Lu, much like the rest of the Zhou dynasty, was rife with corruption and nepotism. Confucius's attempts to climb the bureaucratic ladder were akin to trying to sprint through quicksand, but he wasn't deterred. If anything, the obstacles only fueled his determination. In a world where family connections were the currency of power, Confucius's lack of pedigree was a serious handicap. But hey, who needs a powerful uncle when you've got a brain full of ideas and a knack for teaching? Confucius's growing band of disciples was a testament to his charisma and intellect. They followed him not because of his social standing, but because of the wisdom he had to offer. It was a grassroots movement before grassroots movements were cool. The chaos of the Zhou dynasty provided the perfect backdrop for Confucius's teachings. He saw the disorder around him and envisioned a society governed by virtue and morality instead of brute force and family ties. His early experiences in the job market highlighted the flaws of the system, but they also inspired him to develop ideas that would lay the foundation for Confucianism. Confucius might not have been able to secure a cushy government gig, but he was well on his way to becoming one of China's most influential thinkers. Talk about making the best out of a bad situation. So there you have it, the early years of Confucius, a man who turned his humble beginnings and a career full of setbacks into a legacy that would outlast the very dynasties that overlooked him. It's a classic underdog story, the kind that would make even the most jaded heart beat a little faster. Confucius's journey from the dusty streets of Lu to the annals of history is proof that sometimes the best way to climb the ladder is to build your own. Confucius's journey from underdog to influential thinker was just getting started. Now, let's fast forward to the point where Confucius decided that enough was enough. The bureaucratic quagmire was one thing, but even the most patient sage has his limits. Confucius hit what we might today call a midlife crisis, but instead of buying a flashy chariot or taking up extreme sports, he opted for a career change, from local philosopher to wandering sage. Picture this. Confucius, somewhere around 50 years old, waking up one day and thinking, hey, why not go on a road trip and spread the good word? And just like that, he packed up his scrolls and his overflowing opinions and set off on a journey across the fractured Chinese states. His mission? To find a ruler, any ruler who would actually listen to his advice on governance. Easier said than done, my friends. But Confucius wasn't just a solo act. He was the frontman of a merry band of disciples, each quirkier than the last. Imagine a ragtag group of students following Confucius like he was the lead singer of a philosophical boy band. There was Zilu, known for his courage and also his tendency to act before thinking. Basically, the group's action hero. Then there was Yan Hui, the favorite disciple, known for his humility and tragic knack for dying young. On the pragmatic side, you had Zhengzi, who stressed filial piety like it was going out of style. Together, they were a mix of personalities that would make for a killer reality show. Their travel itinerary was less glamorous and more grueling. They roamed from state to state, hoping to catch the ear of a ruler who'd appreciate Confucius's wisdom. But in a time when warlords were as common as pop-up ads, that was no small feat. Their journey was like a philosophical tour, but instead of sold-out arenas, they often found themselves in the court of some ruler who was more interested in swordplay than sage advice. Take, for instance, the time they visited the state of Wei. The ruler of Wei was more concerned with his own power games than Confucius's notions of virtue and morality. The philosopher might as well have been speaking to a wall for all the good it did. Yet Confucius, ever the optimist, soldiered on, convinced that somewhere a ruler was waiting with bated breath for his ethical insights. Oh, the dreams we dream! Confucius's travels were not without their economic realities. Travelling with a band of disciples wasn't exactly cheap. There were mouths to feed and scrolls to replace, and while they weren't exactly living in the lap of luxury, they managed to scrape by. Sometimes they relied on the hospitality of the states they visited, accepting food and shelter in exchange for the occasional lecture on ethics. Think of it as an ancient version of couch surfing, but with fewer couches and more straw mats. Now, you might wonder why Confucius didn't just settle down and write a book. Let the royalties fund his lifestyle. Simple. Books were rare, and literacy wasn't exactly widespread. Confucius believed in the power of personal interaction, of shaping minds through dialogue and debate. He was an influencer before influencers were a thing, but his audience was limited to whoever was in earshot. As the years rolled on, Confucius's dream of finding a ruler willing to implement his ideas seemed more like a mirage. Many rulers were more interested in realpolitik than in Confucian ideals. They wanted power, and power didn't play well with virtue. But Confucius was nothing if not persistent. He believed that if he could just find that one ruler, he could change the course of history. His journey wasn't without its comic relief. There were instances where his band of followers found themselves in the middle of a political skirmish, their philosophical debates interrupted by the clanging of swords. They were philosophers, not fighters, and their attempts to navigate these situations often ended in hilarity. Or at least they would have if they hadn't been so perilous. Despite these challenges, Confucius never lost his sense of humor or his belief in the power of his teachings. His optimism was both endearing and, at times, frustrating for his disciples. They saw the world for what it was, chaotic and corrupt, a far cry from the orderly society Confucius envisioned. Yet they followed him, drawn by his charisma and the hope that maybe, just maybe, they could make a difference. Confucius's journey across the states was more than just a quest for a receptive ruler. It was an exploration of human nature. He saw firsthand the struggles of the common people, the ambitions of the powerful, and the gap between the two. His travels informed his teachings, adding depth and nuance to his philosophy. He wasn't just a thinker, he was a doer, someone who lived his ideals even when the world around him seemed determined to prove him wrong. So there you have it, a midlife crisis that turned into a philosophical road trip. Confucius may not have found the ruler he was searching for, but his journey was far from a failure. Instead, it was a testament to the power of ideas and the enduring human spirit. The man who started with nothing more than a head full of dreams and a heart full of questions became a symbol of resilience and hope, a reminder that sometimes the journey is more important than the destination. And while his travels didn't lead to immediate success, they laid the groundwork for a legacy that would outlast even the most powerful of the warlords who ignored him. And thus, the midlife meanderings of Confucius, our philosopher on a mission, set the stage for his ideas to blossom. Let's delve into the teachings that Confucius was so eager to share, those nuggets of wisdom that would eventually be bound into collections like the Analects and the Book of Rites. Imagine these texts as the ancient Chinese equivalent of viral TED Talks, except instead of hashtags, they had bamboo slips. Confucius's thoughts on virtue and governance weren't just quaint ideas for the dinner table, they were a direct response to the chaos he saw around him. Picture the political landscape of his time, a patchwork of states, each ruled by leaders who were more concerned with who had the shiniest sword than who had the best moral compass. Confucius's call for rule by virtue was basically the ancient equivalent of saying, hey, maybe we shouldn't let the class bully run the school. Take the concept of Ren or benevolence. It's like that heartwarming meme that says, be kind. For everyone you meet is fighting a hard battle. Confucius believed that a ruler imbued with Ren could bring about peace and order. He wasn't suggesting that rulers should pass out free hugs, but rather that empathy and understanding could heal society's fractures better than any sword. And in a world where might made right, this was revolutionary, if not downright utopian. Then there's Li, the idea of ritual propriety and decorum. Think of it as the original How to Win Friends and Influence People, only it involved more bowing and fewer PowerPoint presentations. Confucius argued that rituals and ceremonies weren't just pomp and circumstance, they were the glue holding society together. In today's terms, it's like saying, can we all agree to at least pretend we know what we're doing here? It was a call for order in an era of chaos, a plea for everyone to play by the same rulebook. But here's where things get sticky. The Analects and other Confucian texts weren't exactly bestsellers in Confucius's lifetime. The reality was that many of his contemporaries treated his ideas like spam emails, mildly intriguing but ultimately ignored. Confucius was seen as an idealist, a bit like that friend who always has a new plan to change the world but never quite gets around to it. It wasn't that his ideas lacked depth or brilliance. It was simply that the powers that be were too busy playing their own high-stakes Game of Thrones. This brings us to the myth of Confucius as an unparalleled genius, a myth that's as enticing as it is misleading. Sure, Confucius had a way with words and a mind sharp enough to cut through the noise, but he wasn't an oracle with all the answers. In fact, he often admitted his own ignorance, famously saying, real knowledge is to know the extent of one's ignorance. It's almost as if he was the original proponent of the Dunning-Kruger effect centuries before psychologists put a name to it. Confucius wasn't pretending to know it all, he was encouraging everyone else to join him on the quest for truth. Despite his humble self-assessment, Confucius's teachings eventually gained traction, not because they were universally adopted in his time, but because they were rediscovered and revered in later dynasties. His ideas were like seeds planted in rocky soil, only to bloom long after the gardener had left. The irony? The very bureaucratic system that had once thwarted him later embraced his teachings as a cornerstone of Chinese governance and culture. It's like the ultimate posthumous job offer. Economically speaking, Confucius's vision was more about moral currency than financial gain. He advocated for a merit-based system, a radical departure from the nepotism that was as rampant as it was frustrating. Confucius wasn't offering a detailed 5-year economic plan, but his call for leaders to be virtuous was an implicit critique of the economic inequality he observed. He was a champion of the idea that a society's wealth should be measured by the virtue of its people, not the size of its treasury. It's a notion that would make modern-day economists scratch their heads, but one that resonates in an era where wealth disparity is a hot-button issue. Let's not forget that Confucius's teachings were also a direct challenge to the status quo. He didn't shy away from criticizing the abuses of power he saw in the ruling classes, making him both revered and reviled. His was a philosophy that demanded introspection and accountability, traits that were, and often still are, in short supply among those in power. Confucius's legacy is a testament to the enduring power of ideas, even when those ideas are initially sidelined. His teachings on governance and virtue continue to inspire debates and interpretations, serving as a reminder that the quest for a just society is a marathon, not a sprint. And while Confucius himself never claimed to have all the answers, he certainly knew how to ask the right questions, a skill that remains as valuable today as it was over 2 millennia ago. So as we continue to navigate the complexities of modern governance, perhaps we can take a leaf, or a bamboo slip, if you will, from Confucius's book. His teachings challenge us to consider what truly constitutes good leadership, and whether we value virtue as much as we claim to. Confucius may not have found his ideal ruler, but his ideas challenge us to be better rulers of our own lives. And that, my friends, is a lesson worth pondering. Confucius's ideas challenge us to be better rulers of our own lives. And that, my friends, is a lesson worth pondering. But just as we're getting cozy with this ancient wisdom, let's fast forward to the grand finale, or so it seemed, of Confucius's life in 479 BCE. His passing didn't mark the end of his influence, but rather the beginning of a complex afterlife, where his teachings were preserved, reshaped, and occasionally misused like a cheap magic trick at a kid's birthday party. The story of Confucianism post. Confucius is a classic case of telephone, where the original message gets garbled through generations. Confucius left behind a band of loyal disciples who were basically the ancient equivalent of a fan club, determined to keep his ideas alive even as the world kept spinning. His teachings were compiled into the Analects, a collection that's more like a philosophical mixtape than a structured treatise. These texts became the Bible of Confucian thought, but let's not forget, they were written by his followers, each with their own interpretations. Talk about a game of philosophical pass the parcel. As we wade through history, the Han Dynasty, 206 BCE, 220 CEE, is where Confucianism hit the big time. Emperor Wu of Han, a ruler with a penchant for political savvy, decided to make Confucianism the state ideology in 36 BCE. It was a move as strategic as it was symbolic. Think of it as swapping out a clunky old operating system for a streamlined new one. Confucius's philosophy was suddenly all the rage, not because everyone was having an existential crisis, but because it offered a framework that promised stability and governance. In a move that would make Confucius chuckle in his grave, his once rejected ideas became the blueprint for a sprawling bureaucracy. Now, about that bureaucracy, Confucianism wasn't just window dressing for the Han Dynasty's government. The civil service exams, which began during this period, were rooted deep in Confucian principles. This was revolutionary, a meritocratic system that aimed to recruit officials based on ability rather than lineage. Imagine that. Your family name wasn't the golden ticket. Your understanding of Confucian texts was. These exams could make or break a career, and they weren't exactly a breeze. Picture a test so grueling, it makes the SATs look like a casual quiz. Candidates had to memorize Confucian classics, recite them, and apply them to hypotheticals like ancient world case studies. Pass rates were low, but the stakes were high. This was the original high-risk, high-reward scenario. But let's not get too starry-eyed. The romantic notion of a pure meritocracy is as much a myth as the unicorn. Corruption, favoritism, and bribery were as common as noodles in a Chinese market. Theoretically, anyone could rise through the ranks, but practically, the system was often stacked like a rigged carnival game. Confucianism as state doctrine was a double-edged sword, offering legitimacy to the ruling class while providing a convenient justification for maintaining the status quo. The irony here is as thick as a Beijing fog. And then there's the question of economics. Confucianism emphasized frugality and the virtue of simplicity, which sounds lovely until you realize it's a bit like telling a teenager to save their allowance when they're surrounded by tempting gadgets. The Han Dynasty was a period of economic expansion, and while Confucianism preached moral restraint, the reality was that wealth and power often spoke louder than virtue. Confucian ideals shaped societal norms, but they didn't always manifest in economic policies. The empire's prosperity often relied on practices that would make Confucius's head spin, like heavy taxation and forced labor. As dynasties rose and fell, Confucianism became the ideological chameleon, adapting to the whims of rulers from the Tang to the Song to the Ming. Each dynasty put its own spin on Confucian doctrine, like a series of directors reinterpreting the same script. Some used it to justify autocratic rule, while others saw it as a moral compass. The Tang Dynasty 618–907 CE embraced Confucianism alongside Buddhism and Taoism, creating a syncretic blend that kept everyone guessing. By the Song Dynasty 960–2009 CE, Neo-Confucianism emerged, an intellectual revival that sought to reconcile Confucian thought with metaphysical questions. It was like Confucianism 2.0, complete with philosophical upgrades. But here's where it gets amusing. Confucianism was sometimes hilariously misapplied. Picture a sage's teaching twisted into a bureaucratic nightmare, or a ruler using Confucian virtue rhetoric to justify the most unvirtuous acts. In the Ming Dynasty, 1368–64 CE for instance, Confucian ideals were used to enforce strict social hierarchies, with elaborate rituals that would make even the most hardcore etiquette coach blush. The Confucian obsession with filial piety, respect for one's parents, became a tool for maintaining control, ensuring that everyone knew their place in the pecking order. It was as if Confucius's teachings were put through a funhouse mirror, reflecting a distorted version of his original intent. Yet, despite these twists and turns, Confucianism endured. It became a cultural bedrock, influencing everything from family dynamics to educational norms. The Confucian emphasis on education meant that scholars were highly respected and literacy was prized. This wasn't just about knowing your ABCs, or rather, your Hada. It was about understanding your role in the grand scheme of things. Education was seen as the path to moral and social betterment, a belief that's hard to argue with even today. Let's circle back to the myth of Confucius as a timeless sage. Part of the allure is the idea that his wisdom transcends time and place, offering insight into the human condition. But the truth is, Confucius was a man of his time, grappling with the issues of his era. His teachings were a response to the chaos of the Zhou dynasty, not some universal panacea. To elevate him to the status of an untouchable oracle is to miss the point. Confucius was a thinker who asked questions more than he provided answers, a philosopher who challenged the status quo rather than conforming to it. The timelessness of his ideas lies not in their perfection, but in their adaptability. Confucius's legacy is a reminder that history is never static. His teachings have been interpreted, reinterpreted, and sometimes mangled beyond recognition. Yet they persist, a testament to the power of ideas to endure long after their originator has left the stage. It's a legacy worth celebrating, not because it offers easy answers, but because it invites us to continue asking the hard questions. And so, as we leave Confucius and his posthumous adventures for now, consider the journey his ideas have taken, from the dusty streets of ancient China to the corridors of power and beyond. The Confucian dream of a virtuous society remains as elusive as ever, but it's a dream that continues to inspire. After all, in a world where chaos and order dance an eternal tango, perhaps we could all use a bit more Confucian wisdom, or at least a few more questions worth pondering. Confucius's legacy isn't just a dusty relic of ancient China. It's a living, breathing force that has seeped into the nooks and crannies of modern life, from boardrooms to classrooms. You see, Confucius didn't just leave behind a collection of wise sayings for fortune cookies. He left us with a blueprint for thinking about society, ethics, and what it means to be a decent human being. And let's be real, even in our modern hustle, a little decency can go a long way. Let's start with education. Confucius was the OG advocate for lifelong learning, long before it became a catchy slogan for self-help books. His insistence on the value of education wasn't just about accruing knowledge for its own sake. It was about cultivating moral character and understanding one's role in society. In the Confucian worldview, education was the great equalizer, a beacon of hope in a world that often seemed unfairly skewed in favor of the privileged few. Fast forward to today, and you'll find echoes of his ideas in the global obsession with education as a ticket to a better life. We still grapple with the same questions Confucius did. Who gets access to education, and what should it teach us about being human? But here's where the plot thickens. Confucius didn't just envision education as a means to individual betterment. He saw it as a tool for societal transformation, a way to mold leaders who could govern with virtue and wisdom. This is where things get a bit ironic, considering the world's often less than virtuous political landscape. Yet, his ideas continue to spark debates about what it means to be an ethical leader. In a time when ethics scandals are as common as traffic jams, Confucius's insistence on moral governance feels both quaint and revolutionary. Now, let's not kid ourselves. Confucius's teachings have been tossed around like a philosophical football, interpreted and misinterpreted in equal measure. Take the so-called Confucian work ethic, often cited to explain the economic rise of East Asian countries. The notion that Confucius's advocacy for hard work and discipline somehow directly fueled modern economic miracles is a neat tale, but it's a bit like saying Shakespeare invented love. The reality is more nuanced. Confucius emphasized integrity and responsibility, traits that resonate well with any society aiming for prosperity. But reducing his philosophy to a mere economic engine is like trying to explain a sunset with a weather report. It misses the point entirely. And then there's the modern meme of Confucius says, those pithy quotes slapped onto posters and mugs. Most of them are about as authentic as a $3 bill. Confucius didn't walk around dropping one-liners like a stand-up comedian. His teachings were profound, complex, and often required more than a bumper sticker to unpack. Yet the meme persists, a testament to the enduring allure of wisdom packaged in bite-sized portions. It's a reminder of our human tendency to seek easy answers in a complicated world. Speaking of complexity, let's talk ethics. Confucius is often hailed as a moral compass, but here's the kicker, he never claimed to have all the answers. Confucius was more about asking the right questions than providing a tidy moral code. His teachings encourage a kind of ethical reflection that demands we think for ourselves, a rather radical notion in any age. In today's world, where ethical dilemmas often come with all the subtlety of a sledgehammer, Confucian thought invites us to pause and consider the broader implications of our actions. Yet, Confucius's influence isn't just about grand philosophical ideas. It's also about the everyday, the mundane. His emphasis on Ren, benevolence, and Li, ritual propriety, speaks to how we interact with one another, whether we're discussing geopolitics or grabbing coffee with a friend. In an era of digital connections and social media spats, Confucius's call for empathy and decorum feels like a breath of fresh air. It's a gentle nudge to be a bit kinder, a bit more thoughtful, a bit more human. And here's the delicious irony. Confucius, the sage who couldn't catch a break in his own time, is now a global icon. His journey from obscure philosopher to cultural juggernaut is a narrative twist worthy of any epic tale. The man who once wandered the Chinese states in search of a willing ruler now finds his teachings debated in classrooms worldwide. It's a legacy that's as improbable as it is enduring, a testament to the power of ideas to transcend time and place. So, as we wrap up this whirlwind tour through the life and legacy of Confucius, let's take a moment to appreciate the absurdity and brilliance of it all. The sage who struggled to find his footing in the bureaucratic maze of ancient China now stands as a beacon of wisdom in a world that often feels as chaotic as the Zhou dynasty. Confucius may not have solved all the world's problems, but he sure knew how to ask the questions that matter, and in a world hungry for answers, that might just be his greatest legacy. In the end, perhaps the best way to honor Confucius is to embrace his spirit of inquiry, to continue asking the hard questions and seeking the deeper truths. After all, as Confucius might have mused with a wry smile, wisdom is not about having all the answers, but about knowing which questions to ask. And that, dear listeners, is a lesson worth carrying with us as we navigate the twists and turns of our own lives. You're jolted awake by a symphony of sounds. The rhythmic clatter of market stalls setting up shop, the distant bleating of goats, and the ever-present rush of the mighty Nile, flowing as relentlessly as time itself. Welcome to your day in 4th century BC Nubia, where you're not just a spectator, but a bona fide warrior, gearing up for whatever challenges this vibrant region throws your way. First things first, let's talk geography. You find yourself in the land of Kush, a stretch of earth that's been the envy of empires. To the north lies Egypt, a stone's throw away. Well, if you're Herculean enough to chuck a rock, 500 miles that is. This is the ancient corridor connecting Africa to the Mediterranean, a strategic hotspot where trade routes are as coveted as the treasures they transport. Gold? Check. Ivory? Double check. Why, you could practically trip over a trove of precious items just walking down a market alley. But don't, because you'd owe someone a hefty sum in ancient currency for damages. Speaking of currency, Nubia's economy is as diverse as its landscape. We're talking about people who know how to hustle. From agriculture to mining, this place is an economic microcosm of ancient ingenuity. Picture fields of emmer wheat swaying gently in the breeze, bread being the original staple of life after all, and then switch scenes to bustling mines where you, or rather your fellow warriors, might double as labourers when not brandishing spears. Nubia's mineral wealth is legendary. The Egyptians didn't dub it Ta Seti, or Land of the Bow, without reason. They knew this region was literally and metaphorically golden. Now, as a warrior, your role is more than flexing muscles and looking intimidating. Although, let's be honest, the latter is a nice perk. You're woven into the socio-political fabric of Nubia, serving as both protector and enforcer. With great power comes great responsibility and a good amount of dirt under your fingernails. The Nubian society is a complex tapestry where the king sits at the top, and you, dear warrior, are his right hand when diplomacy fails or, shall we say, takes too long. The Nile isn't just a picturesque backdrop for your escapades either. It's the lifeline of the land, the vein through which the blood of the region flows. It supports agriculture, facilitates trade, and yes, occasionally hosts a skirmish or two. Think of it as the ancient world's version of the Autobahn, fast-moving and occasionally dangerous. There's a reason the Egyptians have been fighting over this watery highway for centuries. Control the Nile, and you control the heartbeat of a civilization. As you lace up your sandals, metaphorically of course, because leather footwear isn't exactly standard issue, you're acutely aware that every day in Nubia is a balancing act between survival and prosperity. You're living in a time when alliances are as fragile as papyrus and just as easily torn apart. The geopolitical climate is as hot as the desert sun, with Egypt casting a long imperial shadow over the lands south of their borders. But don't fret. You and your fellow warriors are here to ensure that Nubia punches well above its weight class. And let's not get too romantic about the whole noble warrior gig. Sure, you might have a sweet spot in the annals of history, but the day-to-day grind involves more than a few gritty realities. Armour? Not so much. You're donning a simple tunic and maybe a shield if you're lucky. Your weapon of choice is likely a bow, celebrated for its efficiency and range. The Land of the Bow isn't just a catchy nickname, it's a nod to the precision and skill that you bring to the battlefield. As you take a moment to soak in the scenery, you realize that life in Nubia is as much about the past as it is about the present. Every stone, every grain of sand has witnessed the rise and fall of cultures. The region has seen it all, from the grandeur of the Kushite pyramids to the humdrum of daily village life. And now, as you step into this ancient yet bustling world, you are part of a narrative that stretches back millennia and will continue long after you've laid down your bow. In this land of contrasts and contradictions, you find yourself not just as a warrior but as a keeper of history, a living, breathing testament to an era where the past is never truly past, but a living force shaping every breath you take. So, stretch those warrior limbs and prepare for a day where history isn't just something you learn about, it's something you live. Now that you've inhaled the intoxicating aroma of ancient history, it's time to get your hands a bit dirtier. As the sun climbs higher, warming the stones underfoot and making them feel like a failed bread experiment, you join your fellow warriors for the daily training ritual. Forget any romantic notions of invincible spearmen. You're about to be disabused of a few childhood myths faster than you can say "ta seti." The Nubian military system is a well-oiled machine, albeit one without the luxury of heavy armor. We're talking tunics, maybe a shield if you've been a good kid this year, and a bow that's as much a part of your identity as your name. The bow is the star of the Nubian show, so crucial it's practically the Nile's spiritual sibling. Its range and precision made it the great equalizer on the field, a fact not lost on the Egyptians who dubbed Nubia the land of the bow. A fully drawn Nubian bow could launch an arrow over 200 meters. That's like shooting an arrow across 2 football fields and still having enough momentum to ruin someone's day. But let's not kid ourselves. Mastering the bow isn't just about looking cool while doing it. It's an art form, a commitment, a relationship. Your training regimen involves hours of practice, developing muscles you didn't even know existed, all to ensure that when you let fly, your arrow delivers a message more poignant than any diplomatic envoy could muster. And because we're in a time when multitasking is as important as it is now, many warriors are also skilled in hand-to-hand combat. The spear might not be as glamorous as the bow, but it's a reliable backup when things get up close and personal. Now, about those spearmen myths, sure. The image of a brave warrior standing alone against a horde is inspired, but real life? Not quite so dramatic. Battles are messy affairs, and no one man stands invincible. The truth is, spear formations work best in groups, where the strength lies in unity, not solo heroics. Think of it as the ancient version of a rock band. Everyone has their role, and it only works if they're all in sync. Women in Nubian warfare? Oh, they're not just on the sidelines cheering with pom-poms made of papyrus. Quite the contrary. Women have been known to pick up weapons and fight alongside men, a testament to the egalitarian streak that runs through Nubian society. Warrior queens aren't just the stuff of legend here. They're a documented reality. Consider Queen Amanirenas, who, a few centuries later, would lead her people against the Romans with a ferocity that could make even Julius Caesar reconsider his life choices. As for the economic cost of all this martial enthusiasm, keeping an army in fighting shape isn't cheap, then or now. Every arrow, every spearhead, and every tunic has a price, often paid in the sweat and toil of those who mine and craft the raw materials. This is a region where commerce is king, and the army is both a protector and a beneficiary of that prosperity. The land is a crossroads of trade, where gold, ivory, and other treasures flow like the Nile itself, feeding the economic engine that powers your very existence. Your military prowess ensures that trade routes remain open and lucrative, a fact that keeps the Nubian coffers jingling nicely. So, there you are, part of a system that's both ancient and astonishingly modern in its complexity. The military isn't just a bunch of guys with sticks and stones. It's an institution that reflects the society it defends, diverse, innovative, and, yes, a little bit ruthless. As you train under the relentless sun, remember that you're not just a warrior. You're a cog in a machine that's as old as time and as enduring as the pyramids that dot the landscape. And like any good machine, it requires maintenance, understanding, and sometimes a bit of oil to keep running smoothly. In this world of perpetual sun and shifting sands, you learn to navigate the fine line between myth and reality, between romance and the gritty truth. You're part of a grand narrative in which the past is ever present, a powerful force shaping not just your destiny, but that of everyone around you. As you wipe the sweat from your brow, you realize that history isn't just a series of events. It's a living, breathing entity, as much a part of you as your own heartbeat. And in that moment, under the unforgiving sky, you understand that your role is far more than a mere footnote in the annals of time. You are history in motion, a living testament to the resilience and ingenuity of a people who carved out a legacy in the harshest of landscapes. As you shake off the morning's exertions and the sun climbs to its zenith, it's time to dive headfirst into the thrumming heart of Nubian life, the marketplace. Picture a bazaar alive with the cacophony of haggling voices, the scent of spices strong enough to tickle your nostrils, and the sight of goods that could make even the most jaded merchant salivate. Welcome to the ancient world's version of Amazon Prime, minus the convenience of home delivery. Now, before you get lost in this labyrinth of commerce, let's talk trade routes. Nubia isn't just a random stopover on the ancient travel itinerary, it's the Silk Road of Africa. Connections stretch like a spider's web from here to Egypt and far beyond. Think Red Sea, the Arabian Peninsula, and even the distant lands of the Levant. This isn't just the local flea market. It's a global marketplace where ebony, ivory, frankincense, and myrrh are the currency of power and prestige. Speaking of currency, let's address the elephant, or rather, the gold nugget in the room. Nubia is famed for its gold mines, and this isn't just legend. We're talking about veins so rich that even the pharaohs couldn't resist stretching their imperial fingers southward. Gold from Nubia was as sought after as a front row seat at a Beyoncé concert. The gleaming metal flowed north to Egypt, helping to finance those oh-so-modest pyramids and the lavish lifestyles of the pharaohs who were clearly never told that less is more. But let's not romanticize the process. Extracting gold isn't just a matter of picking nuggets off the ground like seashells on a beach. It requires labor-grueling, back-breaking labor. Miners, often captives or lower-class citizens, toil under the unyielding sun, their lives as expendable as the tools they wield. The reality check? Those twinkling treasures come with a cost that doesn't feature in the glossy tales of riches. Now, let's talk ivory. Before you picture majestic elephants gracefully shedding tusks like autumn leaves, let's get real. Ivory in the ancient world is the luxury item du jour, more sought after than a limited edition sneaker drop. It's the stuff of royal palaces and high-status bling. Yet, acquiring it involves a bloody business, hunting elephants across vast distances and transporting the ivory along perilous routes. It's a testament to human ingenuity and an unsettling reminder of humanity's penchant for turning nature into status symbols. As you navigate the bustling market lanes, you're enveloped in the rich aroma of spices, cinnamon, cassia, and pepper. These are not just culinary delights, they're worth their weight in gold, literally. Spices are the ancient world's version of Bitcoin, volatile in price and capable of making or breaking fortunes. They arrive from far-flung lands, their journey fraught with risks ranging from pirate attacks to treacherous weather. Trade routes are not just pathways of goods, they're arteries of culture, ideas, and occasionally diseases. Ebony wood, another darling of the trade network, is as luxurious as it sounds. This dense dark wood is the choice material for everything from furniture to ceremonial objects. However, transporting it isn't akin to a leisurely drive down the Nile. Moving ebony involves long caravans trudging through hostile terrains, where bandits are about as common as sand dunes. Each shipment is a gamble, a high-stakes roll of the dice that can end in fortune or failure. While we're busy romanticizing the notion of traders as daring adventurers, let's spare a thought for the unsung heroes of this trade web, camels. These ships of the desert are the unsung MVPs, carrying loads across arid expanses with the kind of stoic endurance that'd make a marathon runner weep. Their ability to travel long distances without water makes them indispensable, and their value is reflected in the high prices they command. Owning a camel is akin to having a fleet of semi-trucks at your disposal, a must-have for any serious trader. Now, let's not pretend the trade is all sunshine and rainbows, or rather deserts and oases. The political landscape is as tangled as a ball of yarn after a cat's had its way with it. Trade agreements are forged and broken with alarming regularity, often as subject to the whims of rulers as the Nile's floodwaters. Nubia's relationship with Egypt is a complex dance of power, dependency, and occasional warfare. On one hand, trade brings prosperity. On the other, it creates a reliance on foreign markets that can be as precarious as balancing a pot on a pyramid's peak. And let's not overlook the role of the mighty Nile in this grand economic ballet. More than just a scenic backdrop, it's the lifeline of the region, a liquid highway facilitating trade and communication. Control the Nile, and you control the flow of commerce. It's no wonder Egypt and Nubia have sparred over its waters. It's the very essence of power in this ancient world. Yet, amidst all this economic activity, it's easy to forget the human stories behind the numbers. Traders risked their lives to bring goods from distant lands, their journeys filled with uncertainty and danger. The allure of wealth is tempered by the harsh realities of travel and negotiation, where a wrong move can result in ruin or worse. As the sun begins its slow descent, casting long shadows across the market, you're left with a deeper understanding of the intricate tapestry that is Nubian trade. It's a world of contrasts, where the romance of riches is forever entwined with the gritty realities of commerce. A place where every transaction is a story, every good a testament to human ambition and resourcefulness. In this vibrant hub of exchange, you're reminded that history isn't just a series of dates and events. It's a living, breathing narrative shaped by the actions and aspirations of individuals, each playing their part in the grand drama of civilization. So, as you leave the marketplace full of stories and perhaps a few newly acquired treasures, remember that you're not just a spectator to history, you're part of it, woven into the fabric of time, as surely as the goods that pass through these bustling stalls. As the marketplace buzz fades into the background and the sun dips lower, casting an amber hue over the land, it's time to shift gears from the hustle of trade to the heady realm of politics. You're headed to a tribal council, the ancient world's version of a board meeting, minus the PowerPoint presentations but with plenty of drama to go around. It's a place where alliances are forged, rivalries are stoked, and the fate of nations can hinge on a single word or, more likely, a well-placed bribe. Welcome to the political heart of Nubia, where the council isn't just a meeting of minds, but a battlefield of wits. Here, the stakes are as high as the pyramids in Meroe, and every decision is a roll of the dice with the destiny of a civilization in the balance. It's a far cry from the romanticized notion of noble leaders making grand proclamations. In reality, it's a lot more like trying to keep a group of cats herded while simultaneously juggling flaming torches. Let's get one thing straight. Leadership in Nubia is no walk in the park. This region has a history of complex governance structures that make modern politics look like child's play. At the top of the food chain sits the king, a figure of immense power certainly, but also someone who needs to navigate a labyrinth of internal and external pressures. Remember, this is a time when the phrase, "heavy is the head that wears the crown," was less a metaphor and more a physical reality, given the ornate headgear involved. Now, let's dive into the nitty-gritty of these councils. Picture a gathering of chieftains, each representing different factions within the kingdom. These aren't just political figureheads, they're the movers and shakers who bring their own agendas to the table. It's a delicate dance of diplomacy, where every gesture, every glance carries weight. In a world without WhatsApp or email, face-to-face communication is king, and the art of persuasion is as valuable as any commodity traded in the market. The council discussions often revolve around alliances and rivalries that could rival any soap opera plot. You've got various tribes, each with their own interests, and let's just say not everyone plays nice in the ancient sandbox. Add to this external pressures from neighbours like the Egyptians and Persians, both of whom have a keen interest in Nubia's resources, and you've got the makings of a political pressure cooker. Speaking of the Persians and Egyptians, let's talk about the external influence that looms large over these proceedings. Picture this. It's the 4th century BC, and the Persian Empire is a massive juggernaut sprawling across multiple continents, flexing its muscles from the Aegean Sea to the Indus River. Their interest in Nubia isn't just casual curiosity. They see it as a strategic ally, or, failing that, a valuable addition to their empire. The Persians are the geopolitical sharks of the ancient world, and Nubia is swimming in their waters. Then there are the Egyptians, whose relationship with Nubia is a complicated saga of love, conflict, and everything in between. On one hand, they're trade partners, with goods flowing both ways along the Nile. On the other, there's historical tension, with Egypt's eyes often wandering southward, coveting Nubia's gold and other treasures. The Egyptians are like that overbearing cousin who just can't resist borrowing your stuff, and by borrowing, I mean annexing. So, what does all this mean for you, dear warrior, at the council? It means you're part of a society that must constantly navigate the treacherous waters of diplomacy, where today's friend can be tomorrow's foe. It's a world where alliances are as fragile as papyrus scrolls, subject to the whims of leaders and the ever-shifting sands of political fortune. Now, let's not gloss over the gritty realities of governance. While the romantic image of wise rulers deliberating over the fate of their people is appealing, the truth is far more mundane. Leadership involves a lot of nitty-gritty detail work. Think managing resources, maintaining infrastructure, ensuring the loyalty of the army, and keeping the populace content enough not to revolt. It's a balancing act that requires both strategic vision and a knack for micromanagement. The council is also where the unglamorous side of diplomacy rears its head. Bribery, coercion, and good old-fashioned intimidation are all part of the toolkit for getting things done. It's a world where influence is currency, and the ability to manipulate that currency can mean the difference between prosperity and ruin. And let's not forget the human factor. Behind every political maneuver is a cast of characters with their own ambitions, fears, and desires. Each chieftain, each advisor, is playing their own game, with varying degrees of skill and ethical flexibility. The council is a theatre of human drama, where the stakes are nothing less than the future of Nubia itself. As the evening wears on and the discussions grow heated, you're reminded that history isn't just a series of grand events. It's the sum of countless decisions made by individuals, each guided by their own motivations and circumstances. It's a tapestry woven from the threads of human experience, where every choice echoes through the ages. So, as the council draws to a close and the participants disperse into the night, you find yourself reflecting on the complexities of leadership and the intricate dance of diplomacy. In a world marked by both cooperation and conflict, where alliances are as fleeting as shadows, you're part of a society that must constantly adapt and evolve. And as you step back into the cool night air, you carry with you the knowledge that in the grand narrative of history, you're not just a warrior or a bystander, you're a participant, a witness, and a custodian of the legacy that is Nubia. In this land of ancient power plays and timeless intrigue, you're reminded that history is as much about the people who lived it as the events that transpired. It's a living, breathing testament to the resilience and ingenuity of a civilization that carved out its place in the world, one council meeting at a time. And as you make your way back through the night, under a sky blazing with stars, you realize that your story is just one chapter in the ever-unfolding epic of human history. As you make your way back through the night, under a sky blazing with stars, you realize that your story is just one chapter in the ever-unfolding epic of human history. The village by the Nile is now aglow with the warm light of fires, and the air is filled with the comforting hum of community. It's time for the evening gathering, the chance to unwind, share tales, and perhaps add a splash of colour to the day's events. Think of it as the ancient world's version of a TED Talk, minus the PowerPoint slides and the gratuitous buzzwords. The riverside is the perfect stage for this nightly symposium, where the water's gentle lapping provides a soothing backdrop to the lively chatter. Here, the elders are the storytellers, weaving narratives that stretch back through time, connecting today's warriors to the storied past. Now, before you get swept up in the allure of these tales, let's tackle a common misconception head-on, the myth of the noble savage. It's a romanticized vision, painting indigenous peoples as untouched paragons of virtue and simplicity. But let's be real life. In Nubia was anything but simple, and virtue rarely paid the bills. In truth, the Nubian warriors were as complex as the land they inhabited. Their legacy isn't just about swinging swords or drawing bows, it's about navigating a world that demanded adaptability and shrewdness. The real story? It's a gritty tale of survival, where every day involved a delicate balancing act between war and peace, prosperity and hardship. The riverside stories remind you that while the legends are epic, the reality is often a mixed bag of triumphs and tribulations. The elders speak of battles fought and won, but also strategic alliances forged in the fires of necessity. They recount the resilience of Nubian leaders who knew that sometimes the best way to win a war was to avoid it altogether. Take, for instance, the diplomatic cunning of Pi, the Kushite king who, in the 8th century BC, managed to conquer Egypt not through brute force, but through a blend of military prowess and strategic marriages. His approach showed that sometimes the pen, or in this case, the marriage contract, is mightier than the sword. But let's not gloss over the less glamorous aspects. Warfare, while often romanticized, was brutal and unforgiving. Being a warrior wasn't just about glory, it was about hard, unrelenting work. Training was rigorous, and the risk of injury or death was ever present. Equipment was basic, armor often non-existent, and battles were chaotic affairs. It's a stark contrast to the heroic images often depicted in art and literature, where warriors are seen as invincible demigods. The reality was more about endurance, grit, and the sheer will to keep fighting against the odds. As the stories flow, so too do the lessons. The elders speak of the importance of community, of the collective strength that comes from standing together. In a region as volatile as Nubia, where the threat of external invasion was a constant shadow, unity was not just a virtue, it was a necessity. The tales highlight the ingenuity and resourcefulness that allowed Nubians to thrive despite the challenges. From innovative agricultural techniques that tamed the harsh landscape to trade routes that connected them to the wider world, Nubia was a testament to human adaptability. And then there's the matter of legacy. History often remembers the victors, but the true measure of a civilization is in the impact it leaves behind. For Nubia, that impact is profound. Their culture, art, and architecture influenced not just the immediate region, but also left a mark on history that resonated through the ages. Consider the pyramids of Meroe, a testament to architectural prowess that rivaled the more famous ones to the north, or the Nubian contribution to art and religion, elements of which were adopted and adapted by their Egyptian neighbours. As the evening deepens and the stars above shine even brighter, you're left with an appreciation for the layered complexity of Nubian history. The romanticized version might be tempting, but it's the gritty reality that offers the most profound insights. It's a story of resilience, of a people who understood that survival was about more than just physical strength. It was about the capacity to adapt, to innovate, and to persevere. The gathering by the river doesn't just conclude a day in the life of a Nubian warrior. It encapsulates the enduring spirit of a civilization that carved its place in history through determination and ingenuity. In the flickering firelight, with the Nile as a silent witness, you come to understand that the true legacy of Nubia is not just in its past glories, but in its ability to endure and evolve, a lesson as relevant now as it was millennia ago. So, as you sit back and let the stories wash over you, you realize that history isn't just a series of dates and events. It's a living narrative, a tapestry of human experience that continues to unfold. The tales of Nubian warriors remind you that while the past may be distant, its lessons are ever present, shaping the world we live in today. As the gathering winds down and the night deepens, you carry with you the knowledge that you are not just a spectator to history, but an integral part of its ongoing story. In a world where togas were the height of fashion and gladiators were the rock stars of their day, young Julius Caesar was busy plotting his ascent to power with all the subtlety of a peacock on parade. Forget about the farm-to-table movement. Caesar was all about the farm-to-fortress strategy. This was Rome in 60 BCE, a city-state turning empire where political maneuvering was as lethal as any legion, and Caesar navigated these waters with the precision of a seasoned gladiator dodging lions. Caesar's early military career was less about the glory of battle and more about survival in the political arena. Think of it as a mashup of Survivor, Roman Empire Edition, and House of Cards, with a dash of WWE for good measure. Born in 100 BCE, Caesar's family wasn't exactly scraping by, but they weren't the Kardashians of Rome either. They were patricians, sure, but not the top tier. His gilded birthright was more bronze than gold, if you catch my drift. By the time Caesar was in his 20s, he was already knee-deep in Rome's political machinations. In 80 BCE, he was captured by pirates. But don't let the Disney version fool you. This wasn't an adventure. Pirates demanded a ransom of 20 talents of silver, about 610 kilograms for you modern folks. Caesar, though, had the audacity to laugh in their faces and demand they raise it to 50 talents. Talk about a PR stunt. Once freed, Caesar made good on his promise to hunt down those pirates, crucifying them just as he had vowed. Not exactly the hallmark ending, but it did wonders for his reputation as a man of his word. Caesar's rise through the ranks was as much about who he knew as what he did. Roman politics was like a giant game of chess, except the pieces were alive and occasionally stabbed each other in the back. Caesar cozied up to the likes of Crassus, Rome's richest man, who could have bought the entire city of Rome and still had change for a villa in Capri. Their alliance was the ancient equivalent of a billionaire tech mogul and a charismatic startup founder joining forces. By the 60s BCE, Caesar had his eyes set on a military career. Why? Because leading legions was as much about amassing political capital as it was about territorial conquest. The Roman military machine was a beast, gobbling up resources faster than you can say Ave Caesar. Raising and maintaining a legion wasn't cheap. We're talking about 400 men in a standard legion, each needing food, equipment, and the occasional morale-boosting speech from Caesar himself, who was known for his oratory skills. But here's where Caesar really shone, his flair for theatrics. He was a master of the grand gesture, the sweeping statement. In 59 BCE, he secured the governorship of a province, not because he wanted to sip wine in the sun, but because it was his launchpad for military glory. Rome's provinces were the Wild West, lawless, ripe for conquest, and perfect for an ambitious general looking to make his mark. Now, let's talk about the Roman military organization. This wasn't just a bunch of blokes with swords running amok. The Roman legion was a well-oiled machine, the envy of every would-be conqueror from Carthage to the Gauls. Soldiers were equipped with the gladius, a short sword perfect for close combat, and a pilum, a type of javelin designed to bend upon impact, making it a one-use wonder. Ingenious, right? They wore chainmail, lorica hamata, and carried a large rectangular shield, scutum, which they used to form the famous testudo, or tortoise formation. It was less a military unit, more a moving fortress. Caesar's first taste of command came when he was appointed military tribune, a role that was part military officer, part politician. This was his baptism by fire, and he thrived in it. But let's pop the bubble of myth here. Caesar wasn't divinely destined for greatness. He was a shrewd operator who knew how to play the system. The Romans loved their omens and auguries, but Caesar made his own destiny, often with a bit of creative embellishment to keep the masses entertained. Caesar's talent lay in his ability to see the bigger picture. He understood that the costs of war weren't just measured in denarii, but in political clout and public perception. His early command taught him that battles were won as much in the minds of the people as they were on the field. The myth of Caesar was just as important as the man, and he knew how to spin both to his advantage. It's easy to romanticize Caesar's early career as the inevitable rise of a genius. But let's be real. It was a series of calculated moves, lucky breaks, and a knack for turning setbacks into stepping stones. He wasn't some divine figure chosen by the gods. He was a man who knew how to make Rome's complex web of alliances work for him, like a master puppeteer pulling the strings of power. So there you have it, the early days of Julius Caesar's military career, where every move was a chess piece in the grand game of Roman politics. A young commander with a flair for dramatics, Caesar was already scripting the play of his life, one actor diurna headline at a time. And if you think this is the peak of Caesar's theatrical prowess, wait until you hear what he does next. Spoiler, it involves an entire river and a declaration that would change the course of history. Stay tuned. And so we find ourselves at the banks of the Rubicon, not literally, but metaphorically speaking. We're about to plunge into the swirling rapids of Julius Caesar's Gallic Wars, a saga of strategy, ambition, and, let's be honest, an epic PR campaign that would make any modern spin doctor weep with envy. If Caesar's early career was the appetizer, this is the main course, served with a side of Gallic spice and a sprinkle of Roman imperial ambition. The year is 58 BCE, and Caesar, now the governor of Gaul, decides it's time to stretch his military legs. Picture it, Gaul, a patchwork quilt of tribes, each with its own customs, leaders, and, crucially, grudges. This was no monolithic entity, but a collection of fiercely independent peoples. Caesar saw opportunity where others saw chaos, and he had just the plan to exploit it, divide and conquer, baby. His strategy wasn't just about winning battles, it was about winning hearts and minds, or at least bending them to his will. Caesar's divide-and-conquer approach was as much about psychology as it was about swordplay. He had a knack for playing tribal rivalries, like a maestro conducting a symphony of discord. He'd ally with one tribe, use them to defeat another, and then, in a twist of Machiavellian brilliance, turn on his former allies if it suited Rome's interests. It was like a never-ending game of Survivor, Gaul, where alliances were as fleeting as a Roman summer. Now, a campaign of this scale wasn't just about strategy. It was a logistical nightmare that would have given any quartermaster sleepless nights. Feeding tens of thousands of troops was no small feat, especially in a time when fast foods meant catching a rabbit on the run. Caesar, however, was a logistical genius. He managed to keep his legions fed and fighting fit by commandeering resources from the very lands he was conquering. Talk about a self-sustaining war machine. In his Commentaries on the Gallic War, Caesar writes with the modesty of a man who knows his audience, future Roman historians and senators, and isn't afraid to put a little spin on the narrative. He describes his exploits with a flair that would make a Hollywood scriptwriter proud, portraying himself as the benevolent conqueror liberating Gaul from itself. But let's be real, Caesar was as much liberator as your average tax collector is a philanthropist. Take his encounter with the Helvetii, a tribe trying to migrate across Gaul. Caesar's response? Not on my watch. He blocked their path, engaged them in battle, and when his diplomacy by sword technique didn't quite pan out, forced them to return whence they came. The Helvetii were left reeling, and Caesar was left with his first big win, which he duly recorded with the subtlety of a peacock on parade. But here's a myth-busting moment for you. Caesar wasn't invincible. Far from it. He had his fair share of tactical blunders and close shaves. The Battle of Gergovia in 52 BCE comes to mind, where Caesar suffered a rare defeat at the hands of Vercingetorix, the Gallic chieftain who united various tribes against the Roman invaders. The Romans, for all their discipline, were outmaneuvered and outsmarted, forcing Caesar into a retreat. It was a bitter pill for a man who considered himself Rome's foremost military mind. Economically speaking, Caesar's campaigns were a windfall for Rome. The spoils of war were shipped back to the city, filling the coffers and keeping the Senate's purse strings loosened in Caesar's favour. Gaul itself, rich in resources and manpower, became a jewel in the Roman crown. But for the average Roman soldier, the rewards were more tangible: loot, land, and, crucially, a share in Caesar's ever-growing legend. These were the perks of serving under a general who understood that loyalty was built on both respect and reward. Caesar's ability to turn foes into friends was legendary. He was a master of the olive branch, offering clemency to defeated enemies in exchange for their allegiance. This wasn't just goodwill. It was a savvy way to incorporate local leaders into the Roman system, ensuring stability and, more importantly, a steady flow of local knowledge and resources. His knack for making Gauls into Romans wasn't just cultural assimilation. It was the original franchise model, expanding Rome's influence one loyal subject at a time. Yet, for all his talents, Caesar's ambition often outpaced reality. His decision to pursue Vercingetorix to Alesia in 52 BCE was a gamble of epic proportions. The siege was a masterpiece of Roman engineering, with Caesar's forces building a double ring of fortifications to trap the Gauls inside and fend off reinforcements from outside. It was siege warfare at its finest, but it was also a close-run thing. Supplies ran low, morale wavered, and had the Gallic relief force been a little more coordinated, Caesar might have faced his Waterloo, or should I say, Alesia-loo. In the end, Caesar's success in Gaul was a testament to his relentless drive and adaptability. He turned a disparate collection of tribes into a unified Roman province, all while maintaining the illusion of invincibility. But behind the curtain of myth, there was a man who knew how to leverage every advantage, from tribal politics to military might, to further his own ends. So, as we look back on Caesar's Gallic wars, it's tempting to see it as the inevitable rise of Rome's greatest general. But let's keep our feet on the ground here. It was a combination of strategic brilliance, logistical prowess, and no small amount of luck. Caesar was no demigod, just a man who knew how to play the game better than anyone else. And as we gear up for the next leg of his journey, remember, the road from Gaul to the heart of Rome is paved with ambition, and Caesar was just getting started. So, as we strap on our metaphorical sandals and prepare to march alongside Caesar, let's dive into the next act of his grand theatrical production, the civil war against Pompey. If you thought Caesar's antics in Gaul were high drama, just wait until you see him take on the Roman political establishment with all the subtlety of a rampaging elephant in a pottery shop. The year is 49 BCE, and Caesar is standing at the banks of the Rubicon River. This is no ordinary river crossing. It's the equivalent of dropping a political nuke on Rome. See, the Rubicon was the point of no return, a small, seemingly innocuous stream that marked a boundary between his province and Italy proper. Crossing it with an army was tantamount to declaring war on Rome itself, a big no-no in Roman law. Yet here was Caesar, about to burn the biggest bridge of them all. His famous line, "Alia iacta est," or "the die is cast," wasn't just a catchy soundbite for the history books. It was a calculated move, a gamble of epic proportions, and a declaration that chaos was about to reign supreme. Now, let's paint a picture of what this meant for Rome. Up until this point, the Republic was wobbling like a Jenga tower missing a few too many blocks. The Senate was divided, the political scene was as stable as a soap opera plot, and Pompey, once an ally of Caesar in the first triumvirate, was now his biggest rival. Pompey had the Senate's backing, but Caesar had the loyalty of his legions, and he knew how to use it. By crossing the Rubicon, Caesar was betting on his troops' allegiance and his own ability to outmaneuver Pompey, both militarily and politically. The economic implications of this move were staggering. War is expensive, and Rome's coffers were already stretched thin from decades of expansion and internal strife. Caesar's campaigns had poured wealth into Rome, sure, but they had also created a financial black hole of debt and resource depletion. His soldiers expected land and loot as rewards, but the price of keeping them happy was mounting faster than a chariot race. It was the ancient equivalent of trying to balance a national budget while throwing a very costly party. But the real genius of Caesar's strategy lay in his use of propaganda and psychological warfare. He was a master at portraying his actions as noble and necessary. His writings, notably the Commentari de Bello Civili, cast him as the reluctant hero forced into conflict by the machinations of a corrupt Senate and a power-hungry Pompey. This wasn't just spin, it was a full-on PR blitz designed to sway public opinion and, perhaps more importantly, to keep his legions' morale high. It's worth noting that Caesar's troops were fiercely loyal, not just because of his charisma, but also because he paid them well and promised them the spoils of victory. As Caesar advanced into Italy, cities fell like dominoes. His legions moved swiftly, capturing key locations with minimal resistance, a testament to both their efficiency and the fear Caesar instilled in his enemies. Pompey, caught off guard by Caesar's audacity, opted for a tactical retreat, heading for Greece where he hoped to regroup and gather reinforcements. This was a strategic decision, but one that left Italy in Caesar's hands, at least temporarily. At this point, the Senate was in full-on panic mode. Caesar's crossing of the Rubicon had thrown the political landscape into disarray, and the balance of power was shifting faster than a Roman chariot on a racetrack. The economic strain of the war started to bite, with Rome's grain supplies under threat and inflation rearing its ugly head. The city was teetering on the brink of chaos, and the Senate was scrambling to maintain control, issuing edicts and rallying what support they could muster. Meanwhile, Caesar's psychological warfare was in full swing. He issued proclamations of clemency, offering forgiveness to those who surrendered and pledging to restore order to the Republic. This was more than just a tactic, it was a strategic masterstroke that undermined Pompey's support while painting Caesar as a benevolent conqueror. For many Romans, weary of endless power struggles, Caesar's promises of stability and reform were a breath of fresh air, even if they came wrapped in a cloak of martial law. Yet, behind the facade of Caesar's magnanimity was a man who knew how to wield power with ruthless efficiency. His propaganda machine churned out stories of Pompey's failures and the Senate's corruption, shaping public perception and rallying support for his cause. It was a classic case of controlling the narrative, and Caesar was a maestro at the helm. But let's not sugarcoat this. Caesar's tactics were brutal. His legions were relentless, and while his strategy was often to win cities with minimal bloodshed, resistance was met with swift and decisive action. His reputation as a military genius was well earned, but it was also built on a foundation of fear and coercion. The myth of Caesar as the liberator was compelling, but the reality was often far grimmer. As the war raged on, the financial toll on Rome escalated. The costs of maintaining Caesar's legions were astronomical, and the disruption to trade and agriculture hit the economy hard. Rome was a city under siege, not just by Caesar's forces, but by economic instability. The Senate, desperate to fund their defences, resorted to heavy taxation and borrowing, plunging the Republic deeper into debt. Yet, despite the chaos, Caesar's star continued to rise. His ability to blend military prowess with political savvy was unmatched, and his victories in Italy bolstered his image as Rome's rightful leader. His crossing of the Rubicon had been a gamble, but one that was paying off in spades. The Republic was crumbling, and Caesar was there to pick up the pieces, one province at a time. So, as we leave Caesar on the brink of his next great battle, remember this: the road to power is rarely a straight line. For Caesar, it was a tangled web of strategy, ambition, and no small amount of luck. His crossing of the Rubicon was just one step in a journey that would reshape the Roman world, but it was a step that defined his legacy as one of history's most enigmatic figures. And as we look ahead to his showdown with Pompey, the stakes couldn't be higher. The die is cast, my friends, and the game is far from over. And so, as Caesar's star continued to rise in the Roman political cosmos, he found himself on a collision course with destiny, or at least with Cleopatra, the most infamous queen of the Nile. Fast forward to 48 BCE, and we land in the sun-drenched chaos of Alexandria, Egypt. This was no postcard paradise, though. Picture a city simmering with tension, a powder keg of political intrigue ready to explode. Enter Caesar, the Roman general with a penchant for the dramatic, and Cleopatra, the enigmatic queen whose allure was as legendary as her political savvy. Now, let's clear the mist from the supposedly steamy romance between Caesar and Cleopatra. Hollywood might have you believe it was all moonlit nights and whispered sweet nothings, but the reality was a bit more, shall we say, transactional. Cleopatra wasn't just a pretty face, she was a ruler fighting for her throne amidst a brutal civil war with her brother Ptolemy XIII. She needed Roman support like a fish needs water, and Caesar was the man with the bucket. Caesar's arrival in Egypt wasn't exactly a vacation. He was chasing the remnants of Pompey's forces after their defeat at the Battle of Pharsalus. In a plot twist worthy of a Shakespearean tragedy, Pompey had sought refuge with Ptolemy XIII, only to be unceremoniously murdered. Not quite the welcome mat he was expecting. Caesar, ever the opportunist, saw an opening to extend Roman influence in the region. Egypt was the breadbasket of the ancient world, and control here meant a steady grain supply for Rome. In other words, it was all about that dough, literally. So, how did Caesar and Cleopatra meet? Was it love at first sight? Not quite. Cleopatra, barred from the palace and desperate to meet Caesar, famously smuggled herself in by wrapping up in a carpet, an entrance that would make even the most daring of circus performers blush. This wasn't just Cleopatra's flair for the dramatic, it was a strategic move that screamed, "I'm here, and I mean business." Cleopatra knew that aligning with Caesar could tip the scales in her favour against her brother. As for Caesar, he saw Cleopatra as both a solution and a potential problem. Supporting her could stabilize Egypt under a ruler favourable to Rome, but it also meant getting involved in yet another civil war, stretching his resources thinner than a Roman toga on laundry day. But Caesar had never been one to shy away from risk. He threw his support behind Cleopatra, leading to the famous siege of Alexandria. This wasn't just a skirmish, it was a full-on urban brawl, with Caesar's forces holed up in the city and Ptolemy's troops baying for blood. The economic stakes were high. Egypt's wealth, primarily from its fertile lands, was a tantalizing prize for Rome. But it was also a logistical nightmare. Caesar's legions were far from home, reliant on uncertain supply lines. The costs of maintaining an army in hostile territory were enormous, and the treasury was starting to feel the pinch. Yet Caesar's gamble paid off. With the eventual defeat of Ptolemy XIII, Cleopatra was restored to the throne, with Caesar's backing solidifying her power. It was a win-win, or at least that's how Caesar spun it. And what about that legendary romance? Sure, there was likely some personal chemistry, both were charismatic leaders with larger-than-life personas, but let's not get carried away with the romance. Cleopatra was playing a high-stakes game of political chess, and Caesar was another piece on the board. Their relationship was as much about mutual benefit as it was about any grand passion. Cleopatra needed an ally, Caesar needed a stable Egypt. The personal and political were intertwined, but make no mistake, this was more alliance than amour. But let's not gloss over the fact that Caesar's Egyptian sojourn wasn't all roses. It stretched Roman resources to breaking point. The Senate, back in Rome, was less than thrilled with Caesar's Egyptian adventure, seeing it as a costly distraction from more pressing issues at home. There were murmurs of discontent, even among his supporters, about the wisdom of entangling Rome in another foreign conflict. Yet Caesar's knack for turning potential disasters into strategic victories was on full display. Through a combination of military might and political maneuvering, he secured Rome's interests in Egypt while bolstering his own standing. Economically, the alliance with Cleopatra was a boon for Rome. The grain shipments resumed, feeding the Roman populace and keeping the urban plebs placated. but it came at a cost. Caesar's support of Cleopatra meant a long-term Roman presence in Egypt, requiring an ongoing military commitment. It was a delicate balancing act, and one that would have repercussions long after Caesar's time. For Cleopatra, her alliance with Caesar was a masterstroke. It secured her throne and established her as a key player on the world stage. Yet, she was acutely aware of the precariousness of her position. Egypt was still a client state of Rome, and her power was, to some extent, dependent on maintaining favour with the Roman leadership. Cleopatra was a queen, but she was also a survivor, navigating the treacherous waters of Roman politics with the finesse of a seasoned diplomat. As Caesar's time in Egypt drew to a close, he left behind a legacy of both triumph and tension. His dalliance with Cleopatra might have been immortalized in art and literature as a grand romance, but it was also a stark reminder of the complex interplay between personal ambition and political necessity. Caesar returned to Rome with victory in his pocket, but the seeds of future conflicts were sown in the sands of Egypt. So, as the curtain falls on Caesar's Egyptian escapade, remember this: the allure of Cleopatra and the allure of power were two sides of the same coin. Caesar's foray into Egypt was a masterclass in strategic opportunism, a testament to his ability to leverage every situation to his advantage. Yet the costs were high, the risks substantial, and the consequences far-reaching. Cleopatra and Caesar's story might be spun as a timeless romance, but at its heart it was a story of power and politics, where love was just another piece in the great game of empires. And as Caesar sailed back to Rome, the real drama was only just beginning. And so, as Caesar sailed back to Rome, brimming with the swagger of a man who just helped Cleopatra secure her throne, he was about to discover that the real storm was brewing much closer to home. The Roman political scene in 44 BCE was a ticking time bomb, and Caesar was about to light the fuse with all the grace of a bull in a china shop. The Senate was bristling with resentment, the common folk were restless, and Caesar, ever the ambitious maestro, was conducting his final act with all the subtlety of a marching band. Let's dive straight into the juicy bit, the Ides of March. You know, the one day in history that makes even the most superstitious folks among us go, maybe there's something to this whole bad omen thing. Caesar, fresh from his Egyptian escapades, and now dictator, perpetuo dictator for life, no less, was strutting around Rome like he owned the place. To be fair, he practically did. But here's where it gets spicy. A group of disgruntled senators, led by the likes of Brutus and Cassius, had other plans for Caesar's eternal reign. Picture them as the original disgruntled shareholders ready to oust the CEO, March 1544 BCE. The day dawned like any other, except for that pesky soothsayer warning Caesar to beware. Did Caesar listen? Of course not. He dismissed the warning with a wave of his hand, heading to the Senate meeting as if he were off to a leisurely brunch. But this wasn't your typical Senate gathering. It was more of a knife-wielding ambush, and Caesar was the guest of honor. In a scene that would have made even Shakespeare blush, Caesar was stabbed 23 times by his supposed allies. Talk about a brutal boardroom coup. Now, let's unpack this bloody affair. The conspirators justified their actions as a defense of the Republic, worried that Caesar's power was sliding into outright tyranny. But the reality was a tangled web of personal grudges, political ambition, and a dash of good old-fashioned jealousy. Caesar's reforms, though popular with the masses, had ruffled too many elite feathers. His push for centralized power was like waving a red flag in front of a bull, and the Senate was ready to charge. The immediate aftermath of Caesar's assassination was chaos on an epic scale. Rome was a city in turmoil, with public outrage spilling onto the streets faster than wine at a bacchanalian feast. The conspirators had hoped to restore the Republic, but instead they'd thrown it into disarray. Mark Antony, Caesar's right-hand man, seized the moment with the finesse of a seasoned politician. He delivered a eulogy that was part tearjerker, part rabble-rouser, igniting the Roman populace and setting the stage for his own rise. Antony was a master of spin, turning Caesar's death into a rallying cry against the conspirators, an ancient example of PR wizardry. Economically, the fallout from Caesar's death was like a financial hangover for Rome. His assassination halted reforms that had stabilized the currency and promised land redistribution to veterans. Caesar's death left a vacuum that was swiftly filled by chaos and uncertainty, sending the Roman economy into a tailspin. The Senate, already struggling with debt from previous wars, now faced the Herculean task of restoring order amid political upheaval. Yet, despite the immediate chaos, Caesar's military innovations outlived him. His reorganization of the legions and introduction of a professional standing army were revolutionary. Gone were the days of citizen soldiers called up for the occasional skirmish. Caesar's legions were a disciplined, full-time force, a template for future military powers. His tactics, especially his use of engineering in warfare, were studied and emulated long after his demise. Caesar had set the bar for military strategy, and even in death he cast a long shadow over Rome's military doctrine. Now, let's talk legacy. Ah, the sweet perfume of myth versus reality. Caesar the Great, the man who crossed the Rubicon and reshaped the Roman world, has been immortalized as a near-mythical figure. His charisma, his military genius, his political savvy all spun into a narrative of inevitability. But scratch beneath the surface, and you'll find a far more complex portrait. Caesar was a man of contradictions, a populist with patrician roots, a conqueror who courted the common man, and a reformer whose ambition ultimately led to his downfall. His assassination, for all its drama, was a turning point that marked the end of the Roman Republic and paved the way for the rise of the Roman Empire. Augustus, Caesar's adopted heir, would emerge from the ensuing power struggle to become Rome's first emperor, cementing the shift from republic to empire. Caesar's death was the catalyst for this transformation, a testament to the enduring impact of his life and legacy. So why, you ask, are Caesar's tactics still studied today? Simple. He was a pioneer of strategic innovation. His ability to adapt, to see the battlefield as a living chessboard, set him apart from his contemporaries. Whether it was his use of fortifications at the siege of Alesia or his audacious crossing of the Rubicon, Caesar's moves were calculated risks that paid off more often than not. His blend of military might and political acumen remains a gold standard in the annals of strategy. As we wrap up this whirlwind tour of Caesar's life, let's ponder the historical spin. Caesar's story is a cautionary tale of ambition and power, a reminder that even the mightiest can fall. Yet, it's also a story of resilience, of a man who, for better or worse, reshaped the world in his image. The romanticized great Caesar is but one facet of a multifaceted leader whose influence endures to this day. In the end, Caesar's legacy is a tapestry woven with threads of glory and tragedy, ambition and hubris. He was a man who dared to defy the norms, to challenge the status quo, and in doing so he left an indelible mark on history. So, as we bid farewell to Julius Caesar, let's raise a metaphorical goblet to a figure who, for all his flaws, taught us that history is never just black and white. It's a spectrum of human endeavour, a canvas painted with the bold strokes of those who dared to dream big and act boldly. César la vie César, your tale is one for the ages.